whatever will be, will be. And for example, in the Madeleine McCann case, where there is a huge establishment lie, in my opinion, being told about it, the public really aren't buying it now. And there has been a bit of a sea change in that one issue. And if the truth can come out on that issue, perhaps people will realise just how many lies the media do spin on other issues.
Welcome to Richplanet TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. You'll be pleased to know this programme is not sponsored by bloody mouse mesh. Did you know that mice can squeeze through gaps the size of a pencil? Did you also know that mice can find their way to the surface of Mars? That is, if you believe NASA images. Now, as people's heads have become filled with more and more lies acquired from years of mainstream media propaganda, it is now becoming increasingly difficult to have a simple conversation with ordinary everyday folk. I've started using a stopwatch to see how long people can hold a conversation with me before they say something which is wholly untrue or unevidenced, but which they annoyingly believe to be true. Most people don't get past 60 seconds. But what can you do? People's minds now consist of two very distinct compartments, although most don't realise these compartments exist. The first compartment consists of everything they see and hear firsthand in their own lives, in their own space, which they know to be true. The second compartment consists of everything they are told by the media, which they have been shown no proof of, but they generally believe to be real. If you listen to people talk, it is easy to identify which of the two compartments they are speaking from. People will flip from one to the other without realizing it. When they flip from real world to media fantasy world, they will often start their sentence with, "Did you see that program?" Or, "It said in the paper." When they start their sentence with these words, it is your job to point out to them that they have just switched to the non-proven compartment of their mind, so you are now going to put earplugs in if they don't stop talking shit. Stephen Hawking has been in the news again. Or perhaps I should say the person pretending to be Stephen Hawking. And just who is controlling that voice box of his? Hawking, according to The Independent, said, "Leaving Europe threatens Britain's status as a world leader in science and innovation." Really? Leaving Europe threatens Britain's status as a world leader in science and innovation. That doesn't sound like a very scientific statement to me. It sounds more like fear-mongering from a source which is attempting to manage public opinion using a fake role model. MI5 must now have a whole department dedicated to writing the crap that comes out of Stephen Hawking's voice box.
If I sound like Stephen Hawking, do you think people will believe everything I say?
$12.99 from any good toy shop. You just set the switch to Hawking, speak clearly, everyone believes everything that you say. Don't make the mistake of setting it to Davros. Now, let's consider the issue of spying. Spying is the obtaining of information considered secret or confidential without the permission of the holder. So if somebody makes an accusation that they've been spied on, due to the secret nature of spying, it is sometimes difficult to prove. The people you would expect most likely to be spied on are the important or the powerful. So when Donald Trump made a claim that he had been spied on, my reaction was, that doesn't surprise me, tell me more. But apparently, according to the BBC, GCHQ have denied they spied on Trump. Yep, the intelligence agencies feel the need to deny this. If an intelligence agency feels the need to deny something, you know you've hit a nerve. When our wholly untrustworthy mainstream media is trying to convince us that Trump was not spied on, you know the opposite is probably true. More on Trump later. But before that, sustainability, the new word I am sick and tired of hearing. Ask yourself, just what is it exactly they are trying to sustain? The planet, I hear you say. Really? I would contend that the thing they are actually trying to sustain is control over your mind. Control over your mind so that you keep your hands off the planet while others benefit from and become the owners of the planet. The sustainability psyop relies heavily on public gullibility. It's not the planet that needs saving, it is those that disguise their motives with words like sustainability that need saving, or preferably put in a capsule and ejected off the planet, which is a very rich planet. Thank you. Okay. Thank you for coming along this evening, everyone. There's a guy came in earlier on. Let me just turn that down. Yeah, who's travelled all the way to Merthyr from Italy. He didn't choose London or Manchester. Thought he'd come to Merthyr, but that's because Merthyr's the centre of the known universe. Obviously, incredible. Okay, yes, thank you to each and every one of you for coming along, because the majority of the proceeds from these lectures is what funds my research and my films. So by coming along this evening, you funded a whole, another year of Richplanet. Okay. Now, tonight I'm going to talk in part one for about an hour and a half. I'm going to talk about my new Madeleine McCann film. I'm going to talk about the fakery war, and I'm also going to talk about the Bridgend suicides, which is obviously local to this area. I've done a bit of research into that. We'll have a 15-minute break, and in part two, I'll speak for an hour. I'm going to talk about NASA and the moon landings. I've got some new information on that. And I'm also going to talk about my film UFOs and NATO, and I've got some new information on that as well. Yeah, I thought I'd put a picture of Trump up because I assumed that people would want my opinion on him. And when he got elected, people were quite excited because they were saying things like, well, he's going to make friends with Russia, create world peace, and he's going to sort out all of the fake news in the mainstream. But I actually think his policies may well be academic. And to explain that, I just want to introduce this guy. This is Barry Trower, who I met last year. I did a 2-hour-long interview with him. Barry Trower worked for MI5 and other parts of the government for many, many years. He's an expert on how microwaves affect people. He's also worked as a spy. So he was given a job in a prison as a PE teacher, but his real role, he was actually spying on the inmates to try and get information out of them regarding child abuse or VIP's involvement in child abuse. So this is what Barry Trower had to say about the security services and how they operate.
If I can just say one thing to the young people watching this. Now, I spent 11 years talking to spies and I know how they work. And I say this at conferences, to young people especially, be careful what you put on your social media website. Your password is irrelevant. If you type in, let's say you're 15, I went to a party, I smoked marijuana, and I didn't like it, I was sick and I won't do it again. Okay, that's now on your website. I'm dating this girl, we're both only 15, but we had sex. I'm still with her, we're married now, we're happily married. And I'm glad that we started our relationship and it went where it did. Everything's forgotten. And this is how spies work. 20 years, 30 years is nothing to a spy. Nothing. They will come back to you 20 years, 30 years later. Hello, Mr. Smith. You won't know me. You are now the CEO or the government minister or the head of a bank or whatever. I have your reference here for your job. You didn't actually say, because I have your other document here, Facebook, you didn't say that you had underage sex with a girl underage. That is illegal, underage sex. You didn't say that in your reference. You didn't say that you took drugs in your reference. Now, this can be made known and you can resign in disgrace and your children will come out of their private school. And I know this happens. Your children will come out of Eton or whatever, and this and this and this and this, and your wife will probably leave you and you will have to sell your big house. Or you can sign one document and we will leave you alone forever. And the document is usually a reference or a passport to verify an identity for somebody who is another spy, to give them status and a job. And now they are in the country, they have status. It will be a civil service job or some other job. They will work their way up. And this is how spies work. And they are already going into other countries' Facebooks and what have you, gathering this information, and it is sitting there.
Scary stuff. So what he's saying is they collect information on everyone in case you become a person of influence. Now just consider Donald Trump. He has been a person of influence for decades. And I suspect that Donald Trump is an intelligence agency's dream. So when you consider his financial affairs, his private life, and his alleged links with Jeffrey Epstein, I suspect the CIA have got a filing cabinet full of dirt on Donald Trump. So that means the CIA could probably get rid of him like that whenever they want to, which means what he's trying to do is pretty much academic. Now, I just want to mention WikiLeaks here because if you've watched Richplanet for any length of time, you will understand that it's my opinion that WikiLeaks is just a CIA front. It's not what it purports to be, and it's being used for psychological operations. That's not to say that some of the information isn't real that it puts out, but in my opinion, it's been done by the CIA. Where's your proof of that, Richard? Well, I'm not going to present that today, but I am intending to do a whole program about WikiLeaks with Andrew Johnson, with something that we're working on just to expose what's going on with them. Now, if we consider that in relation to the emails that were leaked, Hillary Clinton's emails just before the election, many people think that she would have been elected if those emails weren't leaked. So that tells me that perhaps the CIA selected Trump. Very interesting. Now, I'm not saying that Trump is working for the CIA, but why might he have been their man? Well, I can give you my hypothesis as to what I think might be going on in the world today. Trump would be considered to be a very nationalistic president. So he wants to close the borders, he wants to renegotiate trade deals. We've also had a nationalistic movement in the UK with Brexit. And there are also moves in Europe where we've got increased nationalism. Now, many people believe that strong nation states is the only thing that will oppose a one world government, new world order, centralization of power that everybody fears. Okay? So my suspicion is that Trump, Brexit, and what's happening in mainland Europe are all fake nationalism. So they're forms of nationalism that have been set up to eventually fail. That's my opinion. And you will often hear Brexit and Trump in the same sentence in the mainstream. Is it really true that we've got these three simultaneous nationalistic movements happening at the same time? Or have they all been set up to fail? So that's just my opinion. As I say, it's just an opinion. I've not got any actual proof of that. And I mentioned Julian Assange, and here he is at the Ecuadorian embassy in London. Now, Ecuador has very good relations with the United States. I can't think of any reason why it would sully that reputation by protecting this guy. And if Julian Assange is dangerous and is wanted by the United States, why haven't they issued an extradition request for him? Because I'm not aware that they have, like they did with Gary McKinnon. This is all theatre, in my opinion, to try and big up in people's minds this fake hero. But as I say, I do intend to do a program all about Assange and WikiLeaks in the coming year. Andrew Johnson and myself, we did a program all about David Icke. And that program, we said a lot of good things about David Icke. The intention of it was to find out where the good information stops and where the disinformation begins. And we're going to do the same with Julian Assange. And if you want to get information, at least on what Donald Trump is trying to do, don't get it from the BBC website, don't get it from The Guardian, just go onto the White House's own website and watch these daily briefings with this guy, Sean Spicer. It'll tell you at least what their agenda really is, rather than what the BBC tells you it is. Now, just to a little bit about Richplanet and where I started on this journey. I started in 2008 with a website all about UFOs. That website was seen by this fringe TV channel, and they invited me to make some low-budget TV programs, which I did. I made 6 TV programs, and then I found out about other cover-ups and conspiracies and being involved in that. So I've made programs about 9/11, the London bombings, all kinds of things. And as I say, started in 2008. I've now produced over 200 programs. This is my 8th UK speaking tour. Now, last year, you might have noticed that I only made 12 programs, but these are much longer and far more in depth because they're not being made for television. It's not worth me being on television anymore. They really were clamping down on what I could say. So it became completely useless to be on television, quite frankly. So I'm going to continue with this format next year. So 12 TV programs spread over 24 weeks, fortnightly. That then gives me time to make films and do detailed investigations. Now, one of the detailed investigations that I did last year was an investigation into the Didcot murders. So this is murders which occurred in May 2015 when 21-year-old Jed Allen, who had no history of violence, he was known as a gentle giant by his friends, is alleged to have murdered his mother with a hunting knife, who he loved, his stepfather, who he had a good relation with, and his baby sister, 6-year-old sister. He's supposed to have murdered all 3 of them with a hunting knife and then fled the area and then killed himself. There was no motive at all. And the other thing that set alarm bells off for me is the way that it was reported. So he texted all his friends to say, yeah, it was me, and then he conveniently commits suicide. Now, I wanted to investigate this case because it was reasonably close to where I was living in South Wales. So I went to the inquest, I spoke to many of his friends. And when I first started looking into it, I thought it's some sort of mind control thing, because the guy just had no motive to kill his whole family. But after I went to the inquest and did some inquiries, I learned that this case is all about drugs, because Jed Allen's mother was a long-term heroin user. And right at the time of the murders, there was a very, very powerful drugs gang who'd been running all of the drugs in Didcot for over 10 years. They were awaiting trial. Okay, so I'm convinced that the murder of the whole family was connected to drugs. And this is how he was portrayed in the mainstream media, because he happened to like the character Wolverine. And this tells me that this cover-up was run right from the top. Now, I don't believe that the police were involved in the murders, but I believe that it suited the police's agenda to run the investigation to frame him. Right? I believe others murdered the whole family, but I believe that the police had a reason why they framed him. It suited their agenda. And the Oxfordshire Guardian felt it necessary to try and debunk my film, because people in Didcot were starting to watch it. Conspiracy claim on triple murder slated. So in this article, the police are actually quoted. The police are quoted in denying the findings of my documentary, as is the mayor of Didcot. Mayor of Didcot, Steve Connell, said, "I think it is in incredibly poor taste. I don't think it should be given the time. I don't even think it should even be talked about. I heard about it. I haven't watched it, and I refuse to." So if he hasn't watched the film, how does he know it's in incredibly poor taste? This is the kind of idiot we have in positions of responsibility in our country. And I have discovered that the mayor here played on the same rugby team as one of the drugs gang that were under investigation when the murders occurred. And if you go to the comments section on that news article, you will find 20 comments. 18 of them are supporting my documentary. So this represents kind of a deviation for me into the area of true crime. Now, since I've got involved in true crime stories with the Madeline case and the Derek Bird case, I've got to know some very knowledgeable people who've looked at other cases, like the Jill Dando case, or the Sarah Payne case, or the Soham case. And there are so many cases where there's been an element of police cover-up, or I should say government cover-up, because sometimes these police cover-ups are approved from above Chief Constable level. And there are so many cases that need to be exposed. I could spend the rest of my life exposing the true crime cases. Now, you're not going to find these exposés on Panorama or Dispatches with Mark Williams Thomas, right? What he does, he protects existing cover-ups, that guy, right? You're never going to find a genuine journalist, even the likes of John Pilger on mainstream. They're not there to try and unravel government cover-ups or police cover-ups. But as I say, it's just, there's cases begging to be exposed, let me tell you. Right, which brings you on to the Madeleine McCann case. Now, in my last Madeleine McCann film, I mentioned a guy called Peter Hyatt, this American guy, and I said that, he'd expressed his opinion on the case. After the film went out, I was contacted by him, right? I hadn't had any contact before that. This is an American guy who's an expert on witness statements. So he can read a police witness statement and he can tell you, usually within seconds, if that person is lying, why they are lying, what they are lying about. He's an expert in language. He looks at every little verb and pronoun. It's incredible. He's like a scientist on language. And he can, if you're lying to him, he will spot it like that. Okay, so he emailed me to tell me that I'd said something which wasn't quite right in my documentary. So I emailed him back and said, well, what's your opinion on the Madeleine McCann case? So he gave me his opinion. So I said to him, well, would you do an interview? And gladly, he agreed. This guy has trained the FBI, US law enforcement, lawyers in the United States, and he runs college courses on statement analysis. So I went over there in November last year, and I did a 2.5-hour interview with him. Cost me £900 in total to get a plane and all the rest of it. That was the total cost. But that's been funded by you. Richplanet people coming to these talks, and I hope you think it was worth it. Those of you who've seen the Peter Hyatt interview, right? Because this is new evidence, really, or new analysis with regards to the Madeleine McCann case. So Peter Hyatt analysed an interview that the McCanns had given in 2011, and this is his conclusions. Madeleine is dead. The death was not intentional. The McCanns have disposed of the remains in a hidden manner, and they feel confident will not be found. The cause of death may have included causing her to be very sleepy and a fall. They have feared being accused. The time frame must be questioned, and there's a strong possibility of sexual abuse. Now, those conclusions line up closely with the conclusions in my previous 3 films, and he hadn't even watched those films. So if you want to find the truth about the Madeleine McCann case and the facts, then go to madelinefilms.net, where you will find the most detailed documentary series ever produced about the case. So we've got 14 hours of documentary now that I've produced on this. Don't get it from the BBC. And on this year's tour, I am launching my final Madeleine McCann film entitled Madeleine, Why the Cover-Up? And this film addresses 2 questions. Firstly, how might Madeleine have died? Because it's my strong belief that Madeleine McCann did die days before she was reported missing. And secondly, why might that have caused an establishment cover-up? See the image here of Madeleine. It's actually a composite of 2 images. The bottom half of the body is Madeleine sitting by the pool, which is alleged to be the last image of Madeleine that I say was taken, or I suggest was taken, on the 29th of April. The McCanns say it was taken on the 3rd of May. The face, that image wasn't released until 2010. But I suspect that image is also from the holiday, because the length of the hair is the same, and we've also got a Mediterranean-style property in the background there. All right, so the composite image is what I suspect Madeleine may have looked like shortly before she died. But you need to see the film in order to understand that. Now, in the film, I spend a whole hour, this is a 3-hour-long film and split into 2 parts. I spend a whole hour on Robert Murat. Now, Robert Murat was arrested for the abduction of Madeleine McCann, or suspected of it, by the Portuguese police, but he was found to have no involvement. And some people think that the McCanns knew Robert Murat. Some people think he had absolutely nothing to do with the case. Causes a lot of confusion in people's minds. There's a lot of argument over what his role was in the case. So I've dealt with this in this new film. Now, you'll need to watch the film in order to understand what I'm going to say here, right? All the evidence is in the film because he was interviewed, and in his first interview, he comprehensively lied about his whereabouts. The police then got his mobile phone records and they found where he'd been because of the mobile phone pings. So they then re-interviewed him, and he had to admit that he'd been to certain places. And when you look at where those places were, it's the picture starts to come clear, in my opinion. So these are my beliefs about Robert Murat. These are beliefs. They're not statement of legal fact. Here we go. This is what I think his role was. I believe he was in England when Madeleine McCann died. I believe that he acted in 2007 as an agent of British intelligence. All of the evidence for this is in the film. I believe he was quickly recalled to Portugal immediately after Madeleine died. I believe his role when he got there involved the following: to find a property in Lagos where Madeleine's body could be hidden on behalf of British intelligence, offering to act as an interpreter for the Portuguese police and thus infiltrate their investigation on behalf of British intelligence, and thirdly, being used as a fake perpetrator for Madeleine's faked abduction on behalf of British intelligence. And there's a question mark in my mind on that third one as to whether he agreed to be a patsy, whether he agreed to be the fall guy. Now then, if you go out the street and you ask people's opinion on the Madeleine McCann case, people now are starting to question, and they do think that the McCanns may have been responsible or involved in some way. But what most people don't realize is the establishment-led cover-up. So many government organizations and media organizations involved in assisting in this cover-up. And one of the key people has been Clarence Mitchell. Clarence Mitchell, who I said in a previous talk, or I suggested, because I've had it from two different sources, that he's MI5. Clarence Mitchell, the compulsive liar manipulating the British media. He's been the key figure behind all of these bullshit Madeleine McCann headlines, and they're still coming out even now. Got one here. This is a front page headline right at the start of my UK tour when I'm launching the next film. Someone is protecting Maddie Kidnapper. Full page headline right when I start the tour, and that happened last year as well. So this guy's behind all these headlines. Now then, but I don't think he's the only person in mainstream media who's working for MI5. This is Martin Brunt, who is ostensibly Sky News' senior crime correspondent, but I suspect this guy's MI5 too. Martin Brunt is the man who knocked on the door of Brenda Leyland, who happens to have an opinion on the Madeleine McCann case, and he started saying, well, the police are very interested in what you've got to say on the internet. So she fled her house. She didn't want to be interviewed. Not long after, she was dead. Tragic. Now, in the film, there's a phone call featured between Martin Brunt and Robert Murat, because when Murat became a suspect, the Portuguese police started bugging his phone. And there are a couple of phone calls between Murat and Martin Brunt in the Portuguese police files. So I've transcribed them and it's in the film. And it's fascinating to listen to and try and figure out what the hell they're talking about. Martin Brunt is trying to help Robert Murat out of the hole that he's in. This is meant to be an independent Sky News journalist, and he's saying, well, look, if you say this or that in the interview, we can make you look really good. We can get public opinion on your side, which is really strange. Murat's concerns in this telephone call is he's trying to appoint a new lawyer. Because if you consider what I had on that previous screen, let's just say that's true, that Murat had been recalled to Portugal to hide Madeleine's body on behalf of the British intelligence, right? And then he's been fingered by the Portuguese police who don't know any of that, right? He's got to get the right lawyer because he needs to tell them everything, right? You can't appoint a lawyer that's going to spill the beans that Murat's working for British intelligence. So he's very, very concerned, and he's asking Martin Brunt's advice on where will I get a lawyer? And at one point in the telephone call, Murat says, I don't want to end up in prison. Firstly, for something I did not do, and secondly, for something that would break their contract rules. And as soon as he said that, Brunt says, I understand the sensitive nature of everything that we have been working with since we arrived here. So in my opinion, what's happening here is that Murat is mentioning in his contract with the British security services, and Brunt is saying, shut your mouth, Robert, because this call's been recorded. Because earlier on in the call, Brunt tells Murat that he thinks the call might be being recorded. So this is one MI5 warning another, or trying to help out another MI5 agent. As I say, all the evidence for that is in the film. This is what it says about Martin Brunt on Wikipedia. He has a reputation for gaining insider information. High praise for the Sky News crime correspondent Martin Brunt. When a hack from another newspaper phoned Suffolk Police Press Office with a query on the serial killer case, he was told, call Martin Brunt. He knows everything before we do. A little concerning. Brunt was the first to report the arrest of Amy Winehouse and the resignation of Sir Blair as Metropolitan Police Commissioner, and was the first to interview Robert Murat when suspected of involvement in the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. His contacts, and this is a key one, his contacts led to Sky News being first to report that the 7th of July events in London were the work of terrorists. And we know, because of all of the research that you've seen on Richplanet, that it was not the work of terrorists. It was a setup. The guys weren't even on the tube trains when they were blew up. They were murdered by some government agents at Canary Wharf. So if Martin Brunt's been given that information first, that it's the work of terrorists, you know he's got access to sensitive information. And breaking the news of the Queen Mother in 2010, Brunt reported live from Rothbury. So to me, that is strong evidence for what I'm saying. That, and this really is what the Leveson inquiry should be addressing. That we've got these shills in our media that aren't working for the interests of the public. That's not what they're there for. They are there helping to run government or intelligence cover-ups. And they're the main guys that you see speaking in mainstream news. And that's what the Leveson inquiry should be addressing, in my opinion. Not the flipping phone hacking shit. Right. Which is just a phony bone of contention. Now then, I would ask you to consider that the cover-up of the Madeleine McCann case goes much, much wider than most people realise. I would ask you to consider that it has included all of these different genres. And because of that, because it's included all of these genres, you know there's a big, dirty secret at the centre of it that they're protecting. So I would suggest that chat shows have been used to cover up the facts about Madeleine McCann, opera, This Morning, Loose Women, TV dramas, which I'll come on to, similar cases, which I'll come on to. True crime programmes, such as Crime Watch, have helped cover up the facts about Madeleine McCann case. Documentaries, such as Panorama, Dispatches, have helped cover up the facts about Madeleine McCann. If you watch their documentaries and watch mine, you can only come to that conclusion, that those documentaries are cover-ups, or helping the cover-up. TV news stories, newspaper stories, have all helped cover up the facts about Madeleine McCann. Celebrities, we've had David Beckham involved, J.K. Rowling, Richard Branson, some of them perhaps unwittingly. Charities, the Missing People charity. Pop culture, I read that Kate McCann was going to be on Britain's Got Talent. I don't know if that's true. A fake police investigation, Operation Grange, helped cover up the facts about Madeleine McCann. We've also had politicians involved. So we've had David Cameron involved. We've had Gordon Brown involved, Theresa May involved. But the most important politician with regards to the Madeleine McCann case, in my opinion, Gordon Brown. I think he's very closely linked to this case. Now then, I mentioned TV dramas. If you watch the news, predominantly the news is speaking to your conscious mind. It's trying to persuade you of events or a narrative. TV dramas will speak to your subconscious, right? So this drama, The Missing, which is now in its second series, all about a child that went missing on a foreign holiday, they're planting seeds and suggestions into your subconscious. So this one simply is saying young children are at risk of abduction in foreign countries. And I think this series has been made all because of the Madeleine McCann case, and that's the message they're trying to get in the public's mind. Recently, we had this one about the faked abduction of Shannon Matthews. So her mother, Karen Matthews, in 2008, faked an abduction because she'd seen how much money the McCanns were making. Here she is at the police press conference. Now, the subliminal message that I believe was being planted in people's subconscious with this drama, it's not possible to fool the police with a hoaxed abduction, because what this drama portrayed is how dumb Karen Matthews was and how clever the police were and how quickly they saw that she was trying to fool them, right? So it's not possible to fool the police with a hoaxed child abduction. They don't happen, but I believe they do happen if you can call in favors. And people have said that they think that the McCann protection of the McCanns is all about class, that because they're middle-class doctors, they've had help. Bollocks. I don't believe that at all. I believe that there's a big, dirty secret at the center of the Madeleine McCann case, and if that same secret had been at the center of the Shannon Matthews case, they would have had the same protection. It's about the secret. It's not about class. The class issue is a phony bone of contention to distract you. Now, I just wanted to bring your attention to this story, which appeared on the BBC website. So this happened last year, 2016, and it was an alleged abduction of a little toddler, a little girl, from a Primark store in Newcastle upon Tyne. So what's alleged to have happened is 2 teenage girls have come in and led the toddler away. Now, when this story broke, I was being contacted by a woman from Newcastle upon Tyne who lived near where the mother was supposed to have lived. And she was telling me that she thought the whole thing was a fake story because the mother hadn't been named and no one in the locality knew who it was. The child hadn't been named, the teenage girls hadn't been named, and there was no CCTV being released. So there's no evidence which proves this case exists, or there appeared not to be. So I don't know if this is a real case. I don't know if it's a training exercise. It might be a real case, but it's certainly been used for purposes of propaganda, because this sort of PowerPoint presentation the BBC put together on their website, there must have been vast amount of work gone into this. It's a whole sort of sequence of slides that you click on, and some of them have got video and audio in them. It's not just a normal news item. So they've spent a lot of time working on this. If you click on slide number 1, we see here the 101 non-emergency call taken by a handler, Kate McCafferty. Kate McCafferty, yeah. Now, there may well be a woman called Kate McCafferty who works at that call centre, but I suspect they've put that name in there just so that the name Kate McCann pops into your subconscious so that you're thinking of the McCanns while you're looking through the rest of the propaganda in these slides. And the message or subliminal which came across for me with this item was, the police are so efficient in the UK, child abductions are prevented. Because what happened here, allegedly, is that the police got the CCTV footage, they found out which direction the little toddler had been taken in, and then they rescued her. So if only Madeleine had been abducted in Newcastle, we would have saved her. That to me is what they're trying to plant in people's subconscious with this. And similar cases have been used. This is the Ben Needham case from 1991, 26 years ago. But it has many parallels with the Madeleine McCann case. It's a little toddler going missing in a Mediterranean resort, British family. And the other thing in common is that the local police were suspecting the family as being responsible for the child going missing. Now then, this is Ben Needham's mother, Kerry Needham, who was plastered all over our media last year. You may remember it, crying her eyes out because they supposedly found out new information about the case. Now, there are 2 things really to point out about this case. The first is the circumstantial evidence and what most likely occurred. And the second is how it was used for purposes of propaganda. So let's just go through the first. Kerry Needham here was not with her child. This is a 21-month-old baby. She was at work. The child was at a farmhouse with the grandparents, Kerry Needham's parents. Also there was Stephen Needham, Kerry Needham's brother, Ben's uncle. And there was another guy there who was the landlord of the property. So they're all at the farmhouse when Ben goes missing. Now, Stephen Needham, Ben's uncle, 17-year-old, had regularly been taking Ben out for rides on the back of his moped, right? So the circumstances of when Ben went missing were Ben was playing outside. Stephen Needham leaves the farmhouse on his moped. Nobody sees him leave. The parents, a little while later, come outside. They see that Ben's not there. So they both assume that Ben has been taken for another ride on the back of his uncle's moped. Stephen Needham, Ben's uncle, didn't surface for 3 hours. He was gone for 3 hours, and when he got back, there was damage on his motorbike, right? And he jumped straight in the shower when he got back, right? So the Greek police were running their investigation. They suspected that Ben had died in an accident and that Stephen Needham had disposed of and hidden the body. This is Stephen Needham here. Now, I put a link on my website to a documentary that was made about this case in 2000. And a Richplanet viewer emailed me, a very observant Richplanet viewer, telling me that Stephen Needham is exhibiting duping delight in this documentary. Anyone know what duping delight is? Yeah? So if somebody lies to someone and that person buys the lie, the person giving the lie will sometimes show pleasure or they'll smirk because the person's bought the lie. So in this part of the documentary, he's explaining how he gets back from his motorbike trip and then they ask him, well, have you got Ben?
I was out still in the shower. He knocked on the shower door and says, have you got Ben? Have you got Ben with you? And I just said, no. And could hear him going, oh my God.
So why is he smirking? Look at that. He's smirking because the interviewer is believing him. So there's not much doubt in my mind what happened in that case, right? But it doesn't matter. It's a 26-year-old case. It's ripe for purposes of propaganda. So the Yorkshire police sent out a team to Kos to dig a hole in the ground and convinced Kerry Needham that some Greek digger driver who died in 2010 had somehow killed her son and disposed of the body. I'm not aware of any evidence which proves that, but they convinced her of that and they had her bubbling her eyes out all over our mainstream media. That's what they were doing it for. They're not trying to solve the case. So this is the subliminal which came with this case, in my opinion. Families of missing children are always blameless. Kerry Needham was portrayed as blameless and needs sympathy, not scrutiny. So what I think they're doing with the story last year is basically, this is Kate McCann. Okay, we come on to the issue of fake news. How dare they? How dare Jon Snow and the mainstream media point their finger at other sources of information and claim that it is fake when you consider all of the fake stories and news that they've been putting out for decades? Look at 9/11. Just 9/11, one issue, and the amount of lies they've told about it. And they're pointing their finger at other people who try and put out information. So what's this all about? Why are mainstream media doing this? Why have they started pointing the finger at other people when the microscope should be on them? Well, let's have a look at this research. This is a Gallup poll of trust level of mainstream media. So in 1997, we see that 53% of people trusted mainstream media. And in 1999, it was 55%. So well over half. Now, it's below a third, 32%. Less than 1 in 3 people now trust the mainstream media. And I think they're very, very concerned about this. And we can ask the question, well, what have we had over the last 20 years that's possibly achieved this? Well, I would suggest the internet. I think that the internet has allowed people to question and have a platform to oppose mainstream media, which is why I suspect that the trust level has gone right down. But it's a bit more sinister than that. It's a bit more sinister. I got this off Neil Sanders, called JTRIG, the Joint Threat Research Intelligence Group, and other programs feed false information into cyberspace, create false leaders and gurus, and discredit others through concocted stories, sock accounts, and government-paid trolls. They use the principles of deny, disrupt, degrade, and deceive. Among the core self-identified purposes of JTRIG are 2 tactics. 1, to inject all sorts of false material onto the internet in order to destroy the reputation of its targets, and 2, to use social sciences and other techniques to manipulate online discourse and activism to generate outcomes it considers desirable. So they're planting fake information, fake news on the internet, and then the mainstream are pointing their finger at it, saying how terrible it is, when, as I say, the microscope should be on them. And the government are even launching an inquiry into fake news. But I don't see how this can work, because let's just say this Commons Select Committee recommends that we pass legislation so that it now becomes a crime to put fake news onto the internet or onto any platform. So you can be locked up for making fake news. Surely we can get all the executives at the BBC locked up, and ITV, and Channel 4, just by going through all of their 9/11 information or 7/7 information, complete fake news, right? I do hope if they pass legislation, they're not going to try and make it only applicable to the internet. I will be complaining vehemently to my MP if this is what they try and do, if they try and exclude television and print media from this. Okay. Now, if we just consider the internet and go back 20 years, it started as a collection of websites. So if we imagine the websites of these green circles, we had millions of users, which are these pink dots. So you would log on to your website and you would get some information. Okay, and there were many websites. Some websites became search engines, so they indexed all of the other websites so that it was easier for people to find them. But this is what the internet has now become. This is what it has become. The vast majority of people who use the internet now get most of their information from a tiny handful of massive corporate websites. Some people who go on the internet now, they only use Facebook. They think the internet is Facebook. I've spoken about Google in the past and how it doesn't publish its algorithms, and I believe its algorithms are heavily weighted towards pointing people to mainstream sites. 95% of web traffic comes from page 1 of Google, and page 1 of Google is almost always sends you to a corporate site. So they're keeping people on the small number of massive corporate sites. We've got Wikipedia, which is very heavily censored. You might say, well, YouTube, that's not controlled or censored. Well, if you're posting videos of how to make pizzas, they're maybe not going to censor it. But I had a very important 9/11 video removed recently. And this whole concept of viral videos, that anyone, if they make a very interesting video, it can go viral. I don't believe that at all. I believe every video that goes viral is selected by YouTube and it's promoted by its own algorithms. So in other words, YouTube are massaging what the masses are getting to see on there. So it's subtly being controlled. So the more hurtful or truthful information, I think, is not appearing on those right-hand panels when people do searches on Facebook. You might say, well, no, hang on, there are some good independent websites. And you'd be right, there are. So let's put a few of them on. So I'm sure many people in this audience don't just use these websites. They will go to other independent websites and get their information. But the point I'm making here is that the agenda has been to get as many people into this cattle pen as possible, right? So they're not using or finding out alternative information. And they're building, this is a Facebook server establishment to house their servers proposed in Ireland. They need thousands of these servers. This shows you the amount of usage that Facebook have. And just to point out that if you go to the Richplanet website, you will see some programs that we did all about Facebook with Neil Sanders. The fact that Facebook was probably set up in cahoots with the CIA, all of the bad behaviors that Facebook deliberately encourages, the online slacktivism as well. You think that you're achieving something by being on Facebook? Why are you? Okay, now then. I just want to talk about TV comedy now, because if we've got all these falsehoods and all of these lies in our mainstream media, then satirical TV comedy can be used to oppose it and expose it and make it look ridiculous, right? But how come we don't ever get any decent satirical TV comedy now, challenging all the bullshit in our news? Anyone notice this? That the comedy is just shit on TV? It does not really challenge what it could do. Now, I've thought about this, and in my opinion, there is an unwritten rule of TV comedy that every TV comedian follows. Here's the unwritten rule of TV comedy. You may satirize the news, but never its veracity. You're not allowed to make jokes about whether the news is true or not. Because if you do, you will immediately be branded a conspiracy nut. And all comedians obey this rule. So programs like Mock the Week, I could provide them with so much material, right? They never take on board. So, for example, we had the RAF Marham incident, where an RAF guy was jogging and two terrorists supposedly tried to abduct him, right? And then a few months later, they said, oh, no, we think it was just a road rage thing, right? You could have a field day with that story if you satirized it, taking the piss out of the news, because that's clearly fake news. But the first story, they did a whole Crime Watch program on it. And many, many other issues. Now, one guy that used to question whether the news was true and whether it was lying to us is Bill Hicks, who unfortunately, one of the world's best comedians, died in 1994 at the age of just 32. Now, I found an old interview of Bill Hicks speaking not long before he died, and he's talking about how he had this comedy career and he eventually got on TV, but they started telling him that he had to change his material. And so much of what he says in this next clip applies over 20 years later today.
When I was a kid, starting out, I would watch TV and I'd go, boy, if they like that guy, I was looking at comics, if they like that guy, they're going to love me. And that was the impetus that led me to work on comedy and start and continue. And then you get out to Los Angeles and you come to the cold realization that from that kid's wish, boy, if they love this guy, they're going to love me. They don't want me. They don't want you if you have an idea that doesn't correspond to their propaganda. The 90% of it is puerile scat propaganda from the corporations to make us stupid. I kind of feel like everyone has a voice of reason inside them, and I believe that's been quelled to a large degree by our multimedia society that we live in. But anything that defies my voice of reason comes out, and you hold it up to the light of reason. That's the premise. And then you start nailing it, and those are the jokes. Because people are frustrated not having their voice of reason confirmed. And everyone has that voice of reason that goes, this is bull, man, what I'm watching is bull. And yet, the media does not confirm it. So after a while, people begin to think they're insane. And that's the bummer about it. But that's why I love non-mainstream stuff, because you actually hear honest emotions. And that's what you won't hear on mainstream TV ever, is honest emotions. There is a huge audience of disenfranchised people who look at mainstream entertainment and pull their hair out. Bill, we love you because you're so edgy and hip. But when you come on our show, could you not be that way? And I made the mistake of doing it, thinking that, oh, well, you know, I'll rewrite everything so it fits. And now I have no interest in doing that whatsoever. That there's this agenda in mainstream media, and I think it's fairly easy to back this up, to keep people stupid, docile, and apathetic, and therefore the elite who own these corporations and the families that own the corporations, even fewer people, their agenda is to keep us stupid and apathetic.
Okay, you've just got to compare Bill Hicks with this guy to realize there's something not right. And as I say, they will never satirize the veracity of the news. And if your local authority, your local government library has got a poster up of a comedian, you know there's something wrong. These are government-approved comedians. Okay, now I've spoken about the internet and how it's become contrived, and mainstream media and how it's controlled. So let's say you want to get away from those influences. You're going to go out your front door and walk down the street to try and get your information from elsewhere. Where might you end up? Well, you might well end up in the pub. I go to the pub. Can anyone give me the name of Britain's biggest pub chain? Wetherspoons, thank you. Wetherspoons has just under 1,000 pubs. Now, if we imagine that about 2,000 people each week goes into each Wetherspoons pub, that's 2 million people each week. Now, that's as many people going to Wetherspoons as buy a mainstream newspaper. Anyone noticed this? This is a photograph of my local Wetherspoons. This is in Merthyr, right? Anyone notice this? They always have the news on, and it always seems to be BBC News with subtitles. Now, I got quite pissed off at this. Every time I go out my house to go to Wetherspoons, why is the BBC News on? I came out to get away from that. So I pointed out to Wetherspoons that they're promoting propaganda. BBC News is propaganda. I don't think anyone can argue with that. Why would Wetherspoons want to promote propaganda? So I wrote to them and complained, why do I always see BBC News on? This is what Wetherspoons said in their email. When our pubs are not showing major sporting high-profile events on the TV, they will show BBC News, right? So there it is there in black and white. It is Wetherspoons' policy to promote propaganda, the worst type of propaganda, and it is their policy to promote it. So I asked them, why is it your policy to promote this? This is what they said. It is an operational decision based on a number of factors. That's disconcertingly vague, as Alan Partridge would say. So I asked them a more specific question. Has your company been given any financial incentive or other incentive to follow this policy? And they refused to answer that question. Right? Now, you might know that Wetherspoons also have another policy, which is a no music policy, right? Sometimes you'll go in Witherspoons and you hear the buzz of conversation, right? They've got a no music policy. What are people going to be talking about? The BBC News. So they're going to be discussing the news, but in a BBC context, yeah? So it's absolute promotion of propaganda. You're talking possibly 2 million people every week watching that shit. Now, I don't usually drink in Witherspoons. I drink in a pub next door, a few doors along. But there's a guy who does drink in Witherspoons. I've seen him through the window, and he sits there for about 3 hours, absorbing all the mainstream shit into his head. And then just before last orders, he gets out of his chair, and then he walks into my pub, like a Morlock from H.G. Wells' Time Machine. And he sits down next to me at the bar and proceeds to tell me everything he's just seen in Witherspoons on the screen. And I came out to get away from the TV, and I didn't even go into Witherspoons. So the point is the information is going further than just Witherspoons. Anyone notice that Witherspoons seem to have all the best listed buildings in the UK? Now, the Witherspoons in Merthyr was a furniture shop, okay? The guy didn't have it for sale, and he was offered £1 million for it. He said, no, I'm not selling it. And Witherspoons upped the offer until he sold it. Now, £1 million. And they've got, what, just under 1,000 pubs. So that's nearly £1 billion. £1 billion to create the whole Wetherspoons chain, which started in 1979 in London. With this guy, Tim Martin, here he is with a cabinet minister. Here he is with 3 cabinet ministers. So the question I ask is, has Tim Martin been given a helping hand in order to create his empire, right? I don't know that he has, but it's a huge, rapid, expansive business from 1979 in London to what he's got now, right? And I know a lot of landlords that they just can't understand how Wetherspoons can beat them on price, etc., right? So if Tim Martin has been given a leg up by the global elite because he's promoting BBC propaganda, if he has, right, that means that Wetherspoons aren't pubs. They're not pubs. They are propaganda houses disguised as pubs. So next time you go into Wetherspoons, insist that they turn that BBC off, please. So there are many arms to the octopus of propaganda, and I think pubs is one of them, or at least Wetherspoons. All right, let's just talk about money and the economy, because money is something which influences people's lives massively. And the mainstream media never ask the right questions about money, like how is money created? A very simple question which you will never see discussed on mainstream because it hides the global elite, basically. So money is magicked out of thin air by the central bank, Bank of England, or the Federal Reserve in the US. It's not worth anything, right? It's fiat currency. It's then loaned to the government at interest or loaned into the economy by buying other loans. And they get interest on all that money they've created out of nothing. Right? It's a complete con. And it brings about the next question that they never ask, which is debt a planned control mechanism or a random accident? I say it is a planned control mechanism. I learned that Merthyr Council have got debts of 68 million now, but some of those debts go back to the 1980s and are being paid at 9%. Now, what that means is that Merthyr Council is not really in charge of its own decisions, because it has this legacy of debt. So if someone's loaned them money in the 1980s, do they not want that money back? What it shows you is that lending is not there to sort out problems of liquidity, short-term shortages of money. It's there for the long term. And the best way to disempower someone is to get them in debt, whether it be a person, a local authority, or even a government. And that is the purpose of debt, in my opinion. I mean, think about it. We've got record debt, but we've also got record consumption, right? How does that work? What that tells you is that there's no real intention to pay the debt back. So the debt is there as a disempowerment thing. It disempowers you if you're in debt, as it does with Merthyr Council, because they're borrowing more money for new projects, but they're not really in charge of the decision of what that money's been spent on, because they're borrowing it from someone. So your council is not even the council anymore. Okay, now let's just say we sorted out this system that we have, this debt-based monetary system, And to do that, you'd have to get rid of the Bank of England, allow the government to issue currency without debt attached to it. Everyone in this room would immediately be better off, right? The few people who would not be better off are the people who run and hide behind the Bank of England. Now, if we did that, there's still a problem. There would still be a problem, and this is it. It's not so much to do with money, but it's more to do with how people's behaviours have been managed over the last 50 years. What does money actually control in your life? Get rid of money, right? In other words, get rid of it out of the equation and ask what money controls and consider those things, not the money itself. So money controls your time because you have to spend time at work in order to get money. You also have free time. Money controls your stuff. We all need stuff to survive. We need food, we need water, we need shelter, and that's stuff that you need. There are also many other things that we consume that we don't need. This is stuff that you want. So your money will control your stuff and your time. Now, over the last 50 years, this has been the agenda to try and make people more greedy, to increase the amount of stuff that they don't need in their lives, to increase their consumption. But what increasing the whole nation's consumption does is it pushes this line down. Because as a society, we have to work more in order to meet that consumption. Okay? Now, you would imagine in the last 50 years, because we've had such great increases in technology, that people would be spending less time in work. But that hasn't happened. It hasn't happened because consumption has increased exponentially. So it's promotion of greed, essentially, we've had over the last 50 years. And it was epitomized by this statement by Zbigniew Brzezinski. Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was an advisor to many different US administrations over the last 50 years. And this is what he said. The challenge for governments in the future will be to prevent man from effectively discovering his true self and keeping humanity locked into consumerist materialism. He said that in 1969, right? So what he's saying is we're going to promote greed in everyone so they overconsume, and when they do that, they'll be locked in work and they'll then not be able to think for themselves because they'll have no time left. So this is what we end up with, very little free time. We're chasing our tails. And all political parties promote this. Every political party says we need to increase consumption in order to get rid of the debt. It's a complete, just ridiculous argument. And how does this fit in with this new concept they're shoving on us called sustainability? How can you have sustainability when you're increasing consumption all the time? My argument is that people should be given a choice. So if you want to work till you drop in order to obtain as many material possessions as you can, you go and do that, mate, right? But people should be shown that if they live a more modest lifestyle, then they will be able to reduce the amount of time that they work, and they will have more time where they will discover who they truly are. But we have problems in that they're always trying to fool people into new ways of spending their money and increasing this box here. Just watch this.
Welcome to Love Your Garden. I'm here to meet a family in circumstances the like of which we've never encountered before.
Philip passed away just a few weeks from his 41st birthday.
I'm here to tell Sam that even though Philip is no longer around, I want to make for her the garden that he hoped we would. So this garden, small though it might be, has to fulfil a lot of things for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So what will it mean to you, this garden?
Everything.
Every detail of this space needs to be perfect. Because we're building it in honour of a man who always wanted a special garden for his special family. A hot tub small enough for our garden is being put into place. And right next to the tub, the walls of Francis's garden building have also appeared.
Love that little dip in the hedge. So look. You think you'll ever get over it?
I don't think I'll ever get over losing him.
But remembering those who are no longer with us is very much a part of the healing process. So I'd like Sam's memories of Philip to be a part of the garden. David and the boys are racing to finish the cedar deck around the new hot tub. Now it needs an outdoor dining table. It's an absolutely massive olive tree.
I could only guess at the age of that, but I'd say over 100. Louvered screens.
Inspired by a husband and father's final wishes, and 2 boys, Ethan and Josh, and special features for each of them to enjoy.
Open your eyes.
Now, these programs go out to millions of people. Just imagine how many people watched that program that had had a relative die recently. They're going to feel quite guilty that they didn't do that. So, what I think they're doing here is trying to get people to spend as much money on funerals as they do on weddings, right? So I can update my chart now. There's stuff I need to buy that I need, stuff I buy that I want, and stuff to buy for dead people. A whole new marketplace has opened up. Salespeople will be having orgasms, won't they? Now, my dad died recently, okay? And I can tell you something for sure, my mother is not getting a hot tub in her back garden, louvered screens, and a 100-year-old olive tree. So, here's an article in the Daily Express all about that TV program. And just below the article, we have an advert for loans. So they're trying to get you to borrow money to buy things for dead people. I guess we're about out of ideas on this crazy planet. Alan Titmarsh. Right. So we come to the other fake area of news, fabricated terror, which we've spent a lot of time on Richplanet. If I start with 9/11, there's a 500-page book with 800 colour photographs in it at the back there called Where Did the Towers Go? Read that if you want to find out what happened on 9/11. If you compare that with what was reported in the mainstream media, you know it's a pack of lies. Therefore, they've reported fake news. Same goes with the London bombings in 7/7. There's a film at the back there called 7/7 Ripple Effect. Well, there are many shows you can watch on Richplanet. The alleged suicide bombers, they were not on the tube trains or on the bus. They were murdered at Canary Wharf. So again, it's another fabricated event. Now, there have been many, many terrorist attacks since the London bombings, and I suspect that the vast majority of them have been fabricated in one way or another. We've had the Westminster one recently. But they do seem to have changed in their nature. They're kind of smaller these days, but they're trying to use the smaller terrorist attacks to create as much sort of sobbing in the mainstream media and motives for what they want to do. So I'm just going to give you an example here of what looks to me like a fabricated terrorist attack, which happened recently, 2016, last year. So this was reported in Mail Online. It was reported by Reuters and the Associated Press. Car bomb kills at least 8 in Baghdad market. So here are some photographs from the Daily Mail. It states that the bomb killed at least 10 and wounding many. Killed at least 10 and wounding many. So this is where the car is supposed to have been that they blew up. Killed at least 10 and wounding many. Now, what I'm about to show you was all exposed on this website, bellingcat.com. So there's a lot more detailed information which proves what I'm about to say is correct, if you want to check it out. Now, this car bomb attack was filmed by this CCTV camera. So the car in question was parked just there where you see this blackness on the wall there. And they've verified that this is definitely the same site. So this is an RT news report of this car bomb attack. And people have identified these gates on this wall and the various trees. Here are some photographs from Mail Online. So it's all been identified. It's definitely the video of this car bomb attack, which killed 10 people. So here's the CCTV camera, and I'm going to show you the footage of a car bomb attack which killed 10 people. So here's the car. There's a guy next to it. There's a guy in a pickup truck here just getting in. So he's done something to the car, or he's been out the car and he walks to the pickup truck. So there's at least 2 guys in that car. Okay, that looks like a real explosion to me. So I would say that there's possibly military-grade explosives being made available to someone who's put them in there. On come the injured. This guy's up for an Oscar. This guy's up for an Oscar. So we've got another vehicle with a guy getting out. So we've got two vehicles, a number of operatives. So in order to get people to do this, I would suggest they would have been paid. We've got two vehicles, we've got real ordnance, so quite a lot of organising to do this. And this appeared in the mainstream media very shortly after it happened. So you've got to ask the question, well, are the people who are hoaxing these things linked to the people who are putting it in the media? And I've suggested it's a safe bet that they are. And the point is that once it was exposed, they didn't remove that from it. It's still there today, the story of 10 people being killed. They haven't taken it down or apologized. So this illustrates very clearly this case, that when you run an investigation, that you must ask the right questions in the right order. So the first question you must address in any investigation is what happened. You cannot go on to how did it happen, who was responsible, or why did they do it. And this is what they've done with Westminster. Before anyone has been shown or proven what actually happened at Westminster, they jump into this thing, well, why did they do it? Or they were influenced by ISIS or whatever, right? I mean, look at this. We've got a rundown area of Baghdad with better CCTV coverage than Westminster Bridge. I'm still waiting for the CCTV to come. Okay. And we cannot trust what the media tell us about any terrorist attack, whether it's in Westminster or Baghdad, and we cannot trust what they tell us about ISIS or what ISIS is. Now, I was selling this book on the tour for £7. It's sold out, unfortunately, but you can get it from the website or from other websites. Unmasking ISIS. I'll just give you the summary. ISIS is a supercharged new brand of Al-Qaeda, which, like Gladio, was founded by the US to fight Russia. The so-called founders and bogeymen of ISIS, Zarqawi and Baghdadi, were puppets invented by the CIA. ISIS is the latest offensive in a very long-term Anglo-Zionist divide and conquer project to balkanize and subjugate the Middle East. So this is what they're trying to do with Syria. They want to split it up so they can put a pipeline through it by fostering narrow sectarianism and infighting amongst its peoples. Turkey's dictator Erdogan runs ISIS for NATO and is a long-term ally of Israel. So in this book, it explains and gives evidence for where ISIS's military aid has come from: Turkey, United States and Israel, and its financial aid from Qatar, Kuwait, and possibly Saudi Arabia. Something like ISIS does not just spring up overnight. Something with military power, military might, has to be given support from certain nation states. And as it explains in this book, this is where that support has come from. Something that you'll never hear in the mainstream media. And we spoke all about fabricated terror and ISIS on Richplanet with this guy, Zaid, who has links to a Middle Eastern government. Now, so he does have inside knowledge, and he was warning us about attacks coming in Turkey because there was an attempted coup to try and replace Erdogan last summer. And that was primarily because Erdogan isn't being quite as compliant as they would like him to be in running ISIS. So I've asked Zaid to give me sort of an update on the situation. And the area of interest now, or where the troubles are starting, is the Kurdish area. So this is what he said. Turkey under Erdogan is taking steps to break free from nearly a century of subversion initiated by proven globalist stooge Ataturk. Those in Turkey, angered by their country being used as a Western pawn and ally of Zionist Israel, form the backbone of support for Erdogan and his party, the AKP, who are in the process of purging Turkey of anyone who could be considered a potential lackey for external powers. This is the context for Erdogan's reactionary policies, which are condemned as totalitarian by leaders in the West. Whenever Turkey has attempted to break free of its external yoke through democratic means, the military has stepped in to restore control over the nation on behalf of their foreign masters. As such, Ataturk's secular democracy has seen 6 coups, attempted coups, and military interventions in less than 60 years. Proven US intelligence asset Fethullah Gulen was lined up to be the next leader of Turkey to ensure the nation stays on its course of implementing globalist plans following last year's attempted coup. However, the failure of the coup has only served to embolden Erdogan's leadership and push Turkey further into the non-Western power group led by Russia. External belligerents will now redouble their efforts to cause as much havoc and destabilization in Turkey as possible, which means more terrorist attacks, increased pressure on Erdogan's leadership, and increased support for Kurdish independence. So he's saying they're using this fake argument of Kurdish independence in order to blame the terrorism on it. So I said to Zaid, well, if there's going to be terrorist attacks in that region, what are the mainstream going to blame it on? He said, Kurdish separatists, the Turkish government killing its own people, or ISIS. So when you hear that, when you hear the Kurdish region, terrorist attacks there, if you hear the mainstream media reporting this, it's probably not that. It's probably proxies being supported by US and Israel. Okay, a very serious subject though. The Bridgend suicides. So obviously people in this audience will know of Bridgend, South Wales town, which in 2008, the stories started to surface about young people under the age of sort of 17, 18, who were all committing suicide using the same method. They were strangling themselves. And it seemed to be in this small town. Well, it's not a small town, but they were from a small area, and the numbers seem to be very, very high. So I've done a little bit of investigation into this. I did intend to bring out a film for this tour on this, but I'm not at that stage yet. But I'm going to show you what I found. It should be great interest to people in this area. Okay, the first thing I want to point out is just the name Bridgend. Right? I'm not making a dark joke here, but if you wrote down all of the names of the towns and cities in the UK and picked out the ones that were most synonymous with suicide, Bridgend will be top of the list. If you jump off a bridge, you come to your end. Now, I'm not stating this because I think people in Bridgend have committed suicide because the town's called Bridgend, but I am saying that it may have been picked for some macabre reason, and that will become clear in a second. Now, as you probably know, Bridgend is not a poor town. It's probably middle of the range in terms of affluence. There are a few poorer areas, but on the whole, it's not a poor town. And the families that have had these suicides occur, they're not problem families. They're not got drug or alcohol problems or any education problems. They're very, very stable teenagers who've committed suicide. Now, there are various theories, and I'm just going to run through them before I go through the evidence that I've found. The first is contagion, and this would be the official accepted theory, which is that young people are just getting ideas from the outside world and they're being influenced by them. So internet groups, people blame media coverage, they blame the fact that they may be in a cult or a pact with their friends. They're attention seeking, okay? Some people say, no, it's down to just drugs and alcohol problems. Some people say cultural influences. So apparently there's been theatre groups putting on plays about young people committing suicide in Cardiff and other places. So some people think that it's the influence from them. More sinister, perhaps, is the theory about microwaves. Now, I interviewed Barry Trower, who spoke all about the dangers of tetramasts and the police communication system, and he actually wrote to the Welsh government warning them that if they continued to put these masts up, they would get increased suicides in young people. So we've got masts, and also microwave weapons is a possibility, because microwaves have been made into weapons, and Barry Trower speaks about that as well. So they're the various theories, all right? Now, when I started looking into this, I went to Bridgend a few times, and I was just passing the police station. So when you make a film, you've got to get shots of the various places, the high street, the police station. So I put my camera on the tripod, and I just standing there with my hands in my pockets, filming the police station, and a cop van came flying out, and they told me to get in the back of the van. Right, that was interesting. I was just taking some general views of the police station here in Bridgend, and the police came out, asked me to come in their van, asked me a load of questions. Who was I? Where did I live? Why was I filming the police station? They said, in view of the current terror situation, we've got to be really careful if someone's filming the police station. So they put my name in their computer, and they found out how many arrests I'd had, and they let me go. And I told them I was making a documentary about the Bridgend suicides, and one of them said, well, I said, you know, because there's a cluster here, and one of them said, well, they've just picked on Bridgend. All towns have a cluster of suicides. Bridgend's like any other. So he wasn't convinced that there was a cluster. Today's excitement over with. Okay, well, I thought it would be proper to find out if that police officer was correct and get the official statistics first. So I contacted the Office of National Statistics and I got the suicide statistics between 2002 and 2014. So it tells you how many people have committed suicide in every county in the UK. The problem with that is that it doesn't tell you what the population of each county is, so you can't compare them. So I then got a copy of the population statistics of the same period, and I've made my own spreadsheet. So on this spreadsheet, you've got the county down the left-hand side and the year along the top. So in each box, we've got the total number of suicides for that year in that county, the population, and the calculation there, which gives you the number of suicides per 100,000 in that year. So that's how you measure the suicide rate. So I was then able to compare all of the different counties. Now, just to point out, this story started or broke in January 2008, and it was talking about suicides which had happened in 2007. So 2007 is the year it kind of kicked off. So what I've done, I've chosen 7 South Wales counties: Carmarthenshire, Swansea, Neath, Bridgend, Rhondda, Glamorgan and Cardiff, and I've put them on a graph to compare them. So we see here, this graph starts in 2007 and ends in 2014. The thick white line is the average. It's the average suicide for the whole of Wales. So the purple line here is Bridgend. Now, if we ignore this point here, because that's in 2011, it's not 2008 when the story broke. We see, okay, we have got a high figure there, but in 2008, it's lower than the average. 2009, it's much lower than the average. So I would say that this police officer had a point. According to the official statistics, the suicide rate in Bridgend isn't particularly higher than other counties. But these suicides are of young people, so they're under 20, right? This article from 2008 says, senior detectives are investigating 13 young suicides during the past year. So that's 13 in a year. This article says 17 in 13 months. So if we go by, let's say, 15 or 16 of young people in 1 year and compare that with the total. So the total number of suicides officially was 20. So if you've got 15 or 16 under the age of 20, that is a massive anomaly. The majority of the suicides were young people in 2007 in Bridgend. And if we look at this graph, this shows you the likelihood of somebody committing suicide according to their age. We see that the most likely age is in their early 40s, and it's very unlikely for people under the age of 19. That's the age group we're talking about, 15 to 19. So if the average is that low, we can state that if there's 15 or 16 suicides out of 20, then in that year, yes, there is an anomaly. There is something going on here. Now, I'm going to talk about a documentary in a moment, which includes comments from the Bridgend coroner, and these are genuine comments because he's there on the screen saying this. He said, "We did notice in 2007 that we had a very surprising increase in the number of young suicides, in particular over what we normally see. Hanging up until that time tended to be something that young men did. It was very unusual to see a female hang themselves or being involved in a hanging scenario. When we had those increased numbers, it was very noticeable that after a period of time, we were getting increasing numbers of women. Now, that is very unusual, and it suggests to me that they're possibly murders. If women don't normally hang themselves, why? That something's perhaps either been done to them or something else is at play here. Now, the method, they claim the method is always similar. So they will get a cord or even a coat. They'll anchor it to somewhere in their vicinity, like a banister or park bench, tie it around the neck, and then they will often just kneel and lean forward. It's a very simple sort of method, and they do not leave suicide notes, which again suggests to me that they might not be responsible. Okay, now I wasn't prepared to go knocking on doors of parents who'd had their children commit suicide, right? So I was happy to shelve my investigation, right? But I saw this documentary. Now, this is a documentary called Bridgend. It hasn't aired in the UK. It's made by an American guy called John Michael Williams. He came over to Wales for a couple of years. I think he was making this documentary in 2011, 2012, and he managed to meet and film many of the parents that have had their children commit suicide. Now, I think part of this documentary is available online on YouTube. I downloaded the whole thing. You can buy it for like 10 quid or something, but it's never aired in the UK, and it's done to a high standard. It's like a mainstream documentary. Now, I have become very suspicious of this documentary. Just to point out, there is another film called Bridgend about young people committing suicide, but that's a fictional thing, right? So don't get confused with that one. This is a documentary film by John Michael Williams that I have become rather suspicious of. Now, this is John Michael Williams here. He's a singer-songwriter. Here he is with Brooke Shields. He's got connections in Hollywood. He is a good singer. He's sort of like an opera sort of singer, but he's also a filmmaker as well. Now, this is what he says on his website about this film. Through extensive research and investigation, and by literally knocking on doors, earning people's trust, and hiring private investigators, 2 were ex-Bridgend cops, I was able to uncover the identities of the victims and the true stories behind the deaths. I had the good fortune to meet 19-year-old Justin Beecham early on in my investigation, and we quickly became friends. I hired Justin to help me find the victims' families because I had discovered that the first 5 teens found hanged were all good friends of Justin's. Now, bear that in mind. I take it from that he's paid Justin Beecham to help him with this documentary. Now, here are a few quotes from the parents in this documentary. I'm not going to show them. It is quite harrowing to watch. But what this illustrates is that these parents had no idea that their child was going to do this. These are not problem children. Everything was going so brilliantly for him work-wise. He was in the frame of mind where you would never think of it. You wouldn't even think he would do it. There's no way on this earth there was anything to indicate that my son would go and kill himself. Everything was running normal. Nothing that we knew of that he had any problems or any worries. Nothing at all. If you heard her giggle, it was just so contagious that you'd laugh with her even if you weren't in the mood to. We knew that she wouldn't go down that farm. It's so far out of the way, so far out of character, that it just doesn't make sense to us. Kelly was absolutely bonkers. She was really, really outgoing. Everybody loved her, the life and soul of the party. She just loved life. She was just so bouncy. You know, she never walked into a room. She bounced into a room. And she had this absolutely dazzling smile that lit up the room, and she just made everybody laugh. So when you watch this documentary, you realize these parents, they haven't got a clue what's happened. Now, these are my opinions about this particular documentary. Firstly, the story about how it came to be made seems unlikely to me. Secondly, the film's executive producer stroke funder seems like an unlikely candidate to me. The film has not generated significant revenue. The film must have been heavily funded. The film promotes the contagion hypothesis. Williams, that's the filmmaker, he filmed thousands of hours of footage of the parents. He said this in a US radio interview that I've got. I suspect others who are not named may have funded the film. Now, here are the credits of the film. So this is the guy, John Michael Williams, who's the guy behind the camera who's made the film. The executive producer is Alan M. Darlow, MBE. Now, I bet there's got to be a few people in this audience know who Alan M. Darlow, MBE is. Huh? Anyone know who he is? State agency, yeah? You've all heard of Darlow's, yeah? Okay. So this is Alan Darlow, right? And in the year 2000, he owned Darlow's estate agency, right? But it went bust in 2000. So this is an article from the BBC website. So it says half of Darlow's 700 staff could lose their jobs, right? That's a big company, right? But it went bust. Now, despite that, he's still involved in other estate agencies. He's not involved in Darlow's now. He's got nothing to do with it, but it still carries his name. He's involved in other businesses, including property, and he's still a very, very wealthy man, despite his business going bust in 2000. Now, do your own research on Darlow, but here are a few comments that I found on him on the internet. This was in the comment section in a mainstream article. Darlow is a crook, always has been, always will be. The estate agent today should have done their homework. Alan Darlow is ruthless. I remember Darlow's. I think Big Al made a shed load of cash off Winterthur Life by going on a spending spree with their cash whilst renting offices to them that he owned. Didn't I read something on the front page of the Argos about a £31 million debt stroke bankruptcy? Okay, so I'm not personally casting any aspersions against him, but do your own research into the guy. To me, he doesn't seem like a likely candidate to put money into this and not get anything back from it. So the story about how this film got made is that Alan Darlow went to the US. He was on holiday in Palm Beach, and Williams just so happened to be staying in the same hotel, and the two get talking. And Williams tells Alan Darlow about his previous film, which is all about a pact of girls in the US who all got pregnant at the same time, right, and had their babies at the same time. So when Darlow hears this, he says to Williams, well, there's a pact in Bridgend, near where I live, all these kids committing suicide. Maybe you should make a film about that. And then that got Williams' interest, and he's made the film, and Darlow put his own money into it. That's the story. Okay, now I mentioned Justin Beecham, and that he helped Williams, and he's featured quite heavily in this documentary, right? He helped two of his friends committed suicide in 2007. This film's made in 2011 and 2012. So the clips that you're about to see are from 2012. So I've taken out most of the clips that feature Justin Beecham, and I'm going to show you this. This is 9 minutes long. I've put some of my own comments on the screen. Listen carefully to what Williams is saying behind the camera to him as well, and just watch very closely what happens here.
This is the tree Tom hung himself on. There was another branch come off there which he'd done it on. He hung himself on there. And that's the tree David Dillon hung himself on. They cut the branch off that one too. I think Tom hung himself there because David hung himself there. One person does it and another one thinks, oh, look at all the funeral, look at this, look at that, I'll do it. People are doing it because the first thing that comes to their head, they get upset and they think, oh, how did everyone else get out of it? How did everyone else deal with it? And hang themselves, so they don't realise when you kill yourself, there's no coming back. There's no way it's not you're getting out of like one little argument, you're just ending your life for it. Stupid thing to do. It's the first thing that comes to everyone's minds around here. So young, and so bored, nothing to do. Argue with someone, it seems the easy way out, and they go and do it. Get drunk and do it. Shitty thing.
Would you ever kill yourself?
No, I would never kill myself.
No, never, no. Not after what Tom's done. Never, ever. Because I wouldn't put my family through what Tom has put his family through and his mates.
I'd never kill myself either. I wouldn't like to do that to my family and my friends. I know how it felt and it weren't nice. Born on Friday the 13th, devil child. Everyone thinks anyway. I don't think I am.
You weren't. I was in a lot of pain after I had you, and you weren't even in the room. You was in the nursery, and I was still in pain. They voodooed you in the hospital.
They fed you devil blood.
Yeah, definitely.
Devil child.
Devil child.
People send me hate mail. Fucking devil. I have crucifixes in my house.
Oh, the devil over.
I don't know. Do you know, I was on something on Facebook last night, yeah? It's like, who's haunting you and that sort of stuff.
God, yeah.
They reckon there's a lady who's anorexic here, and because she's so anorexic, upset with herself, she's still at her own throat, and she's buried under the house, and she's watching me, and she's unhappy what I'm doing. And if I go to the bathroom and record this up past 6 in the night, I'm going to see her slitting her own throat behind me, and I was like, sounds. It's a nice thing to tell me, innit?
So, everyone, what do you guys think the reason is then for all these kids who have hanged themselves in Bridgend? What do you think?
Drink.
Yeah.
I think it's drink.
I think it's due to drink, drugs, boredom, nothing to do, nowhere to go.
Like I say, it's the first thing that comes to head, isn't it? When, like, say someone's hanging themselves, yeah, and they're a good friend of someone, as soon as they get drunk, they're upset about that person hanging themselves, and they're drunk, and it's the first thing that comes into their head, and they just going through and do it, like... So many people hung themselves, like, comes one hang, then two hang in, but it's like, if you want to kill yourself, if you go and do it a different way, you're not going to get as much, you know, oh, this person's hanging themselves, it's like, it comes in the papers, oh yeah, such and such killed themselves, it's not going to be like, oh yeah, he took an overdose, they wouldn't be like the rest of them hanging themselves.
But I think it's because it's quick.
Yeah.
But it isn't, though.
It's not painless, but it's quick.
Yeah, but you can hang for 20 minutes.
But, you know, when you take pills, you've got to wait for yourself to fall asleep or whatever, you know. If you cut your wrist, it's going to hurt, innit, you know. So I think that when they've had a drink and that's just the easiest thing for them to do.
I don't think that.
I do.
I think they'd jump in front of a train, to be honest, if they don't want to feel no pain. So just demolish it, wouldn't it? I think it's because there's so many people that hang themselves. It's like, why am I going to go and slit my wrist if all my mates have hung themselves? It's like, why were they going to leave a note and let everyone know why they've killed themselves? If they're doing it for the gang thing, they're doing it because everyone else is doing it. They want to be the same as them, don't they? They want to be mysterious and why they've done it, just like the rest of them. They don't want to leave a note and let everyone know why they've done it. They just want to leave it as a big mystery. question mark, like, be like the rest of them, innit? They're going to join the gang, why do it differently? In the papers, they've said about 24 people.
Yeah,
I reckon it's at least around the 50 mark, people have hung themselves, like.
Yeah.
I think they wised up a bit because there's so many people hanging themselves, and they thought every time it goes in the paper, one kid looks at that and thinks, fucking hell, it's all over the front of the paper. Look at that. He's look how much fame that person's getting. Look at all the people talking about it, and that's playing in the back of the mind when they're thinking of hanging themselves. That's playing in the back of the mind. That's pushing them a bit further. I'm going to go and kill myself because you're drunk. You're drunk. You've got no thoughts in your head of the starters. So how are you going to explain it? And sorry, mum, I'm going to kill myself because. And you've got no reason else to explain it apart from you've seen your friend hang himself and you're upset over it. It's not a good reason to take your life. They probably got no way of explaining it. I'm sure many of them wanted to, because Tom said if he ever done it, he'd leave a note. But he probably got to that point in his life and thought, what am I going to say? How am I going to break it to my family? I've killed myself because I've got no reason. I'm just upset at the moment. Mel worried about me when the Tom hung himself. She ringing you and she to see if I was alright, like, because she was worrying about me if I was going to do it. Well, my nan, she didn't help either. She used to come up here and she's gone in the air. So she used to tell me she was talking to Tom and saying Tom's going to come and speak to him in my sleep and that sort of stuff. And I was really upset. I couldn't handle even someone even saying his name. Like, and she was sitting here and I was saying, she's like, oh yeah, he's going to come and see you in your sleep. And he said he had to do what he'd done and all that stuff. And it really upset me. I just burst out in tears. I was like, just get away, nan. Like,
no, I told
she knew what she was doing.
I told her to leave. My mother's a bit of... She thinks she can talk to the dead and she thinks she's a white witch and all sorts.
She got healing
if it floats her boat, let her get on with it, But that day she come in and I told her straight, you are upsetting him and there's no need for that. You know, you're not talking to Thomas at all. So stop trying to make him feel better because you're just making him feel worse.
Because of Thomas and because Justin had friends who have you ever worried about him doing it?
No.
You say,
I've never worried about Justin doing it, never. Because Justin, he's too strong-minded for that. He doesn't think about, if I take my life. He thinks about, what I would go through if he took his life, things like that. So, no, with Justin, no.
Okay, 3 weeks after that's filmed, he commits suicide with Hanger. After being asked so many times, would you commit suicide?
I never thought Justin would hang himself. He was totally against it. He was angry with his friends for doing it. Just never thought he'd do it at all. On the day Justin died, he wasn't acting right. He was acting strange.
Listen carefully to how she...
Like he was here, but he wasn't here. He went to the doctors as an emergency patient. He told the doctor that he was suicidal, that he wanted to kill himself. The doctor referred him to the hospital, but he had to wait for an appointment to come through. So he came home. Me and him had a little bit of an argument. He went out in his car. He came back, told me that he'd tried to hang himself and threw a, like a cardigan cord belt, threw that at me and said that he'd tried to do it but it broke. Then he phoned an ambulance. Ambulance came, took him to hospital. Basically, they didn't have anyone there to deal with him, so they told him to come back Monday. I ask you, what sort of hospital doesn't help a child that's come in and told him that he's tried to kill himself and he wants to kill himself? What sort of place just sends him away with an appointment to come back 2 days later? He left the hospital, went to the police station, left the police station. Even the doctor in the police station, though, said that he shouldn't have been released because he wasn't acting right. Came home then must have been about 1 o'clock in the morning. I asked him if he was staying in, he said no. And he walked back out, and then his girlfriend come down and said that he'd gone to hang himself. So I got out of bed. I phoned the police. And they were looking for him over the road in the field. And I could hear him screaming his name. And then I heard him
scream his name because they found him, and I could hear them saying, "Cut him down." They rushed him to an ambulance, took him to Bridgend Hospital, and basically he was pronounced dead after like 20 minutes of being there. And it's even harder because I don't know why he did it. I get no answers. I've got no answers whatsoever. And I don't know why he did it. I can't think about it. I miss him so much. He was like my little ray of sunshine, you know. He always made me laugh, and I was so convinced that he would never do it. He used to say, "I could never do that to you, Mum. I'd never do that to you, Mum." I don't know what happened to him. Don't suppose I'll ever know, will I, until I get up there and ask him.
Now then, we've got evidence there. We can see him 3 weeks before, perfectly normal, and we've got the mother's testimony there. And if you listen to it carefully, she said he was acting strange, like he was here, but he wasn't here. But that acting strange must have lasted for quite some time, because he went to the doctors, he came back. He went to the hospital, he came back. He had an argument, he went out in his car, he then ended up at the police station, and then it wasn't until 1 o'clock in the morning when it supposedly happened. So you're talking over some period of a whole day, to me it seems like, that he's acting strange, he's there but he's not there. So he's in some sort of altered state of consciousness throughout an entire day. Now that clip that you've just seen, I insisted that Barry Trower, the government expert in microwaves and microwave weapons, watch that clip that you've just seen. I put the laptop on his knee and I said, "You need to watch this and I want your opinion on it as to the behaviour of this young man." Right, so this is what I asked Barry Trower.
Do you think it's possible that they've tested weapons on the public? That's.
There are two answers here. If you're saying, have governments tested microwave weapons and other stealth weapons on the public, it is clearly yes. And they've been to court over this. If you're saying, could microwave weapons be responsible for this, or people testing out different frequencies or different things, the answer is yes. But this is where it gets a bit difficult, because there are, to my knowledge, 30, 40 different countries which test microwave weapons, and they tend to go into other people's countries to do it.
So for all, there's no way that you can say, well, I think it's highly likely or mediumly likely that that guy was acted on by a weapon. You're not saying that, but you're saying that you wouldn't rule that out as a possibility.
I would say it's very strong.
I would say it's very strong that that man was killed using a microwave weapon. This is one of the world's leading experts in microwaves and microwave weapons.
And the reason is that the new atomic bomb of this age is microwave warfare. I do know that from government documents, it is incredibly easy, and I won't go into too much detail. It is incredibly easy. It takes, on average, 30 hours to break a person down psychologically.
30 hours.
30
okay,
hours.
Yeah.
Most people can be broken down into a hallucinogenic mess in 30 hours.
I've showed that at previous talks, and some people have said to me, well, can you spell it out, Richard? What are you saying could have happened? It's not very nice, but just consider it. She's explaining that Justin Beecham is in this fog for a whole day. Barry Trower is saying it takes 30 hours to break someone down. But how do they then go and commit suicide? Well, I don't know that, right? I don't know how it's then done. But if someone is using a weapon, you're not going to find them standing there with the weapon in their hand, right? You're not going to get that evidence. If you want to solve a crime, you have to look for clues. Now, let me just say one thing, though, about the method. I can describe the method in 8 words, right? Find cord, anchor neck, lean forward. 8 words as instruction. Now, I don't know whether it would involve some sort of hypnosis, making the person think that they're elsewhere, or whether it can just be done, whether they've got the technology now to be able to induce that with just microwaves. I don't know, okay? Now then, we come to Alan Darlow. Why would Alan Darlow put his own money into that film when he's not made any money back on it? So I found out where Alan Darlow lives. He lives in a great big house just north of Newport, and with its own grounds and everything. So I went to knock on his door because I wanted to ask him, why did you get interested in these suicides and what's your real motivation? So here's what happened. So I've arrived at Alan Darlow's house, and one of my fears is that there was going to be dogs. There's a few signs up here as well saying, beware guard dogs, dogs roaming free. So this is all his property here, inside this fence, and the prosecution of offenders. All right, so he's got guard dogs, he's got cameras. So 3 vehicles come out, and I spoke to one guy in a removals van, and I asked him if Alan was in. He said, oh, he's not here, but I can give you his mobile number. So I've got a mobile number that I can try him on, but I don't really fancy going past the main gates. I can hear dogs barking, and there's signs all over the fences saying, otherwise you can... Right, yeah. I think I'll ring his mobile. Okay. So I rang his mobile, and I had a 7-minute long conversation with him, which I've recorded. I'm not going to play it, but I will show you what was said. Now, let me just point out, I don't think Alan Darlow's got any knowledge of why these suicides may have occurred, and I don't think he's got any knowledge of microwaves or anything like that, right? That's not what I'm suggesting here. Now, I said to him, what was it that motivated you to get involved? He said, basically, it had been on in the press, and we'd heard about it a lot, and I met John over in Palm Beach, and he was originally to know, but he'd just done a documentary called The Gloucester 17, which was a documentary about girls in Massachusetts High who'd all got pregnant at the same time. He came over to see me, and we were just talking. This is in Palm Beach when he's on holiday. And I said, I've got a good story for you from Bridgend, where, you know, there'd been so many suicides, and then he started to research it, and Darlow's put his own money into it. So I then asked Alan Darlow, did you put money into it? He then said, yes, John and I financed it between us. There was no external finance. Now, if you've seen the Peter Hyatt video, right, when somebody states a negative, when they haven't been prompted at all for it, you're on high alert for deception, according to Peter Hyatt, okay? So I didn't ask him if there was any external finance. Did you put money into it? Why does he feel the need to tell me there was no external finance? When someone states a negative, when they're not prompted, it's possible that it's a lie. So I suspect that there has been external finance. Have you got your money back on it at all? He said, no, not yet, and he started laughing. He then said, I'd like to. I then asked him, did you know it wasn't going to make money, or did you expect to at least get something? He then said, I think we expected it to. I don't know what's happened in America, right? Now, as again, Peter Hyatt will say, when somebody stutters on the pronoun I 3 times, it's a sign of anxiety. It's a sign that he's not comfortable with that question he's been asked, right? And look at this sentence here. I think we expected it to make money. This is a ruthless businessman who puts money into things that are going to make money. I think we expected it to make money. So I don't know for sure, but my suspicion is that Darlow's just been used as a conduit to get money to get this film made, and that there's someone else behind it, probably the military. So, you've seen some evidence that I've presented for you. They're the theories, and this is the one that, the MP, Madeleine Moon or whatever she's called, goes on about, oh, we can't report these cases in the media now because kids are copying off each other, right? I would say at the very least, if there's a discussion on what's caused these suicides, at the absolute very least, the subject of microwave weapons needs to be on the table. Okay? Those thousands of hours of footage that Williams filmed, I ask, is that being viewed at the Pentagon? Because what Barry Trower said is that they usually go into other people's countries to do these sort of tests. Well, we are another country to the US, aren't we? Okay. Okay, it's a dark subject to finish part 1 on. We'll have a 15-minute break. Thanks for listening. Now, if you've seen the Peter Hyatt video of his with the Madeleine McCann subject, have you got a rough figure as to how many cases you've looked at?
Hundreds. Techniques used to discern deception, but also content analysis. So it goes well beyond just saying if someone is lying or not. What are they lying about? Why are they lying? They are to sit down comfortably, choose their own words. They're given bottled water in a comfortable setting. There is no threats. There is no coercion. Please tell us in your own words what happened. And the person says, well, where do I begin? Wherever you feel comfortable beginning. So we don't introduce any language to them or any words. Person writes out what happened. If we then take that statement and properly analyze it in a scientific method, meaning we expect the same results, putting in the same data repeatedly, the investigator can now know this person did it, when he did it, how he did it, why he did it. Will tell us what happened and what happened next. Those are the two most powerful questions that we have. What happened next? Mm-hmm. It allows them to choose whatever they want to choose, and this is an important point. The average person has a vocabulary of about 20,000 words. When you ask someone what happened, they must go into that vocabulary, decide what words to use out of the 20,000, where to order them, what verb tenses to use, what pronouns to use, where to place each word next to each other to communicate in less than a microsecond of time. That is a process that when disrupted by deception, we catch. When someone uses an unnecessary word, unnecessary phrase, unnecessary detail, we deem it as doubly important. And when you ask them what happened, they must go into their memory, and when experiential memory speaks, it is very smooth and it goes in chronological order. A lie will disrupt that, and that causes internal stress. So people say, well, sociopaths don't feel stressed when they're lying. That's not true. They feel very stressed when they're lying because they don't want to be caught. So to disrupt that process is very stressful, and those that are really good at lying will use a substitute of words. So one of the things they'll do, instead of saying, I did not use performance-enhancing drugs, they say, I never used performance-enhancing drugs. I would never. And what they're doing is they're actually distancing themselves from an actual denial.
And what about qualifying words which change or weaken a statement? Tell us about that.
Sure. It can be used appropriately, it can be used inappropriately. If I said to you, I locked my keys in the car, you can be confident that I know where my keys are. They're locked in the car. If I said to you, I think I locked my keys in the car, that's called a weak assertion because I'm not certain if they're there. I did not shoot that man is very different from saying, I don't think I shot the man.
Yeah.
You will know that I asked Peter Hyatt at the end of that interview, would he be prepared to analyse some NASA interviews? And he has done that. So I selected a 7-minute long Neil Armstrong interview from 1970, transcribed it, and I've asked Peter to analyse it, which he's done. Cost me $275 for the analysis. So that's what you've paid for, essentially, by coming here. So this interview aired on the Sky at Night on the 18th of November 1970, which is less than a year and a half after the moon landings. So everything should be pretty clear in Neil Armstrong's mind. So what you're going to see here is a very short clip of the interview, followed by Peter Hyatt's analysis, then another clip, and then more analysis. So although it's only a 7-minute long interview, probably take me 20, 25 minutes to get through the analysis. So here goes.
Mr. Armstrong, I do realize that when you were on the moon, you had very little time for gazing upwards. But could you tell us something about what the sky actually looks like from the moon, the sun, the earth, the stars, if any, and so on?
The sky is a deep black when viewed from the moon, as it is when viewed from cislunar space, the space between the Earth and the moon.
We note and as pauses in the answer and seek to determine if this is a habit of speech or if it is a signal that the subject needs more time to consider his answer. That he began with the sky is deep black indicates a willingness to answer the question directly. This is a somewhat lengthy answer which begins with 2 pauses for thought. The subject is presupposed to have been on the moon, something of great rarity at the time of this interview. The subject is intelligent and well trained. The expectation is that he will, according to the wording of the question, report what he himself saw. In any singular or exclusive event, there is an expectation of heightened importance, and when we speak from experiential memory, the structure of the sentence is reliable. Expected. Given the unique experience of being on the moon, we first note that the subject does not begin his answer with the pronoun I. In analysis, this reduces reliability. Given the context of unique experience, the pronoun I would have shown the psychological strength of experiential memory. Its absence is noted. Even with influence from the interviewer, the expectation is the experiential use of I saw in some part of the answer. Next, we note the use of passive voice with when viewed from the moon. Passive voice removes the subject himself personally from the statement. The use of passivity is found in concealing identity and/or responsibility in statements. For example, the gun went off is passive voice. If the subject was in a crowd and did not know who fired the gun, this would be appropriate. Here, the subject is describing a universal viewing and avoiding the singular experience that is expected. Next, when viewed from cislunar space, the space between the Earth and the Moon. This is similar to the universal pronoun you that is used to describe a common experience. This leads to a question. Is viewing the space between the Earth and the Moon a common experience that listeners would readily relate to?
The Earth is the only visible object other than the sun that can be seen, although there have been some reports of seeing planets.
This is his second sentence after reporting in both passive and universal language. He tells us in general terms what you, universal unnamed, can know, similar to what would be reported in a textbook. Please note the inclusion of some reports. He has thus far avoided giving us personal experience that is highly expected in such an event. This is an indication of avoidance of the response. There is no linguistic connection here between the subject and experiential language at this point. The rule of the negative. Truthful people tell us what they saw, heard, and experienced. When one tells us what they did not see, a la part 1, or hear or experience, the analyst recognizes that this sentence increases in importance.
I myself did not see planets from the surface, but I suspect they might be visible.
Here we not only have the rule of the negative, but we have the unnecessary addition of the word myself. Since he experienced something highly unique, not only does he report what he did not see, but he feels it necessary to input himself into the sentence where no such imputation should be needed. Who else would be answering this question, or not seeing what he did not see? He offers a weak assertion, I suspect they might be visible, appropriately matching might with suspect. Being that he has thus far not told us what he has seen, it is interesting to note the inclusion of the word suspect. What other word might he have chosen? I think they might be visible would be an appropriately weak assertion where one lacks certainty. The word think is the most commonly chosen. Therefore, we note the use of suspect or suspicion within his vocabulary in context of his answer. We continue to wait to hear him tell us what he saw.
The Earth is quite beautiful from space and from the Moon. It looks quite small and quite remote, but it's very blue and covered with white lace of the clouds, and the continents are clearly seen, although they have very little color from that distance.
Okay, this is just an aside from myself. He said that from the Moon, the Earth looks very small and remote. Now, the Earth is 4 times the diameter of the Moon, and we're all used to seeing the Moon in the sky and how big it is. So if you were to see something that big in the sky, would you call it small and remote? Here we have more sensory description, but we have not heard him tell us what he himself saw. The description is strong, but is not yet connected to the subject. This could come from him, or it could come from a book, or another's opinion. With such a stupendous history-making event, we expect to hear up-close personal language. Thus far, we have not.
What about the sun? Could you see any trace of the corona?
No, the glare from the sun on the helmet visor was too difficult to pick out the corona.
Here he says no, which answers the question, but then continues to avoid personal linguistic connection, such as, no, the glare of the sun on my helmet visor was too difficult for me to pick out the corona. This would have been a statement of personal connection, which he has not yet made. Remember, he was asked, did you? With the focus upon himself. He should answer for himself.
The only time we could see the corona was during an eclipse of the sun from the moon. That is, when we were flying through the moon's shadow and could observe the solar corona peeking out from behind the moon.
Even if he said the only time I could see was when we were flying, which would fulfill the personal, impactful event on self while sharing we when flying. Stronger is what I saw rather than we. The pronoun we could be produced if he and at least one other discussed this specific topic. Still, given the nature of a most unique and overwhelming event, the expectation remains. He should be using I and past tense verbs in correlation with sensory description. Please consider that given the spectacular and unique privilege of what he experienced, the pronoun me may be used in a desire not to claim any glory or credit for himself. This may be an indication of team over individual. Even with this accepted, we continue to expect him to at some point tell us what he experienced. Thus far, he has not. When the pronoun we is used consistently, we look for the first emergence of the pronoun I and conclude that the sentence containing it is very important.
Looking at the photographs that you brought back, the coloured photographs of the moon's surface, it seems that the colour of the surface actually varies according to the angle from which you see it. Is this so? Does it do this?
Yes, it certainly does.
The wording is appropriate given the structure of the question. Does it do this? Answered by it does. We do note the inclusion of certainly as an unnecessary emphasis.
It's a characteristic that we observe first while traveling around the moon in orbit. You could see that at the terminator.
Rather than saying we saw and the stronger I saw, he only tells us what they could see at this point. What causes this weak assertion? Why does this historical and spectacularly unique event not yet produce a personal response from the subject?
At the boundary between the black part of the moon and the lighted part of the moon, it was as if you were looking at a television set with the contrast turned to full contrast.
Here he uses the universal you, second person, that is more likely used in commonly experienced issues, such as a television set contrast. Still, however, the lack of personal connection linguistically raises the question of personal impact upon the subject. What follows next is distancing language.
Very black and very white. As you moved further into the light, there were more and more shades of gray. But as you moved further, such the sun was higher above the horizon, you actually start to see the tans and browns appear, although at a very low level.
This is distancing language, you, but the event described is specific to him and exclusively astronauts. There is nothing universal about the movement described. Whereas the listener can be referred to with the use of a television, the same cannot be said of space travel. Description is in the language, but there is no justification for the distancing use of the pronoun you in a very highly specialized and dramatic personal experience.
Similarly, on the surface of the moon, the same characteristic is evident.
Here, there is no pronoun I and no past tense verb. The pronoun I used with the past tense verb is a signal of linguistic commitment. Here, no use of I is also in a sentence where the present tense description is given.
You can see browns if the sun is high enough. Apollo 12, for example, landed while the sun was only 5 degrees above the horizon. So when they arrived, they saw no browns or tans anywhere, only fairly high contrast grays.
He refers back to history and reports what is commonly and already known. The interviewer has asked him specifically for himself of his experiences. This general answer may have caused this next interruption.
But you did.
But yes, I did. The sun was at 11 degrees. And Apollo 12 did also the next day when they arose from their sleeping period and the sun was higher. Of course, then the browns were observable to them.
We finally have the subject speaking for himself. Unfortunately, it is due to an interruption. When he said, yes, I did, we hold to an expectation that he would now include himself, I, and tell us the sensory descriptions that he holds within personal experiential memory. He does not. He went back to history from his previous answer. Therefore, we do not have the linguistic connection that remains expected.
When you were actually walking about on the moon's surface and kicking about a certain amount of dust, did you notice any local colour? And also, were you at all subconsciously worried about the possibility of unsafe areas?
The interviewer presumes he was walking on the moon. We have yet to hear Mr. Armstrong make this claim, or more expectedly, since there is no accusation to the contrary, spoken or unspoken, the linguistic connection.
Well, the color is a puzzling phenomenon on the moon, aside from the characteristics that I've already mentioned. You generally have the impression of being on a desert-like surface with rather light-colored hues. Yet when you look at the material at close range, as if in your hand, you find it's a charcoal gray, in fact, and we were never able to find anything that were very different from that color. I suspect that as we get more and more samples with future flights, we will see that there is, in fact, some color, but the optical properties on the moon are most peculiar.
The theme of distance continues in the description of color. First, he uses the self-reference that I've already mentioned, rather than engage in experiential memory. We note the first reference was also not first-person statement. Next, we note that he avoids telling us what he himself saw by using second-person universal you. You generally have the impression. It is impossible for anyone not there to have this impression, including the interviewer, who did not experience it. We prefer he state without qualification what he saw. He does not. When the pronoun I re-emerges, it is a weak assertion. I suspect that as we get, which is another disconnect from the formula of reliability. First person singular past tense with sensory description.
When you were actually walking about, did you have any difficulty in distance judging? Because I think I heard you say once that far things looked quite near.
Far things look quite near. The topic is sight. The one being interviewed is singular. We look for him to answer with I saw in some form. Sensory is very individual. When it is discussed, one may then say the thoughts or perceptions of another. But here he is interviewed alone and is being asked for first-person eyewitness account. He does not give a first-person singular account.
Yes, we had some difficulties in perception of distance. For example, our television camera, we judged to be from the cockpit of the lunar module only about 50 to 60 feet away, yet we knew that we had pulled it out to the full extension of a 100-foot cable. Similarly, we had difficulty guessing how far the hills out on the horizon might be. peculiar phenomena is the closeness of the horizon due to the greater curvature of the moon than we have here on Earth, of course 4 times greater, and the fact that it is an irregular surface with crater rims overlying other crater rims. You can't see the real horizon. You're seeing hills that are somewhat closer to you. There was a large crater which we overflew during our final approach, which had hills of the order of 100 feet in height, and we were only 1,100 feet west of that hill, and we couldn't see a 100-foot high hill from 1,100 to 1,200 feet away.
Perception. He does not speak for himself, including in the realm of perception. This is to address the brain's interpretation of what was seen or experienced. He consistently in the interview tells us what we saw, we thought, we perceived, as well as what you saw, and so on. Although many of these topics were likely discussed, he should still be speaking for himself. This use of we is most unexpected. We must now consider that if he is not deceptive, why does he have a reason to join a crowd, even in personal experience and perception?
Did you notice any obvious difference between the far side and the near side as you went round it? I mean, apart from the obvious differences in topography?
No observable differences in color, but then the sun's angle was always somewhat different over there, so it would be difficult to make a general correlation. I would say the topography is the striking change. Of course, as all your viewers know, there are no seas on the far side of the moon, and it's all highlands and high mountains, big craters, so it's strikingly different from the...
The weakness continues. I would say the topography is future conditional tense. Even in this singular opinion, he does not give a reliable connection.
There's just one more thing I'd like to ask you. You're one of the very, very few people, I think, whose opinion on this is really worth having. In fact, there are only 4 of you. Do you think, from your knowledge of the moon, having been there, that it is going to be possible in the foreseeable future to set up scientific bases there on anything like a large scale?
Oh, I'm quite certain that we'll have such bases in our lifetime. Somewhat like the Antarctic stations and similar scientific outposts, continually manned. Although certainly there's the problem of the environment, the vacuum, and the high and low temperatures of day and night. Still in all, in many ways, it's more hospitable than Antarctica might be. There are no storms, no snow, no high winds, no unpredictable weather phenomena that we're yet aware of, and the gravity is a very pleasant kind of place to work in, better than here on Earth. And I think it would be quite a pleasant place to do scientific work, and quite practical.
Mr. Armstrong, thank you very much. And again, let me say what a tremendous honor and privilege it's been to have you with us.
Thank you.
Here we have the use of 2 personal connections, I, with both qualified. The first is, oh, I'm quite certain that we'll have such bases in our lifetime. Here he is not only certain, but calls upon the reinforcement of being quite certain. The second use is with a slight stutter on the pronoun I, which suggests the possibility of increase of nervousness. In analysis, this is called the stuttering I and is used to measure anxiety. We use the pronoun I millions of times in life. The brain's efficiency is extreme in this regard. When a non-stutterer halts or stutters on the pronoun I, the commitment psychologically comes into question, with nervousness possibly moving into anxiety and tension. He moves the topic to Antarctica, which is similar to going to another Apollo mission above. Yet we ask, what topic produced the stutter on the pronoun I, the emotion produced regarding a space station? And I think it would be quite a pleasant place to do scientific work and quite practical. The emotion he relates to the future station is pleasant for a specific reason, to do scientific work. Why might this create nervousness or even stress? Okay, so Peter Hyatt now gives his conclusions. He says, Neil Armstrong does not linguistically connect himself to the lunar landing. This is evident in his consistent distancing language, including intuitive pronouns and passivity. What may have caused this? So Peter Hyatt now gives 4 possibilities. Remember, he's a professional analyst, so he's covering his bases here with these 4 possible reasons. You'll see in a moment why I'm saying that. So the first possibility is that there is a security mandate. So Neil Armstrong's been told, you're not allowed to tell anyone about what you saw, right? The second is that this is his baseline. So in other words, he talks like this all the time, even when he's talking to his wife. So say his wife said, Neil, did you enjoy yourself at the pub? He would say, when you go to the pub, you do enjoy yourself if you have a beer with your friends. He goes around talking like that, right? So I don't put much credibility in option 2. Option 3, he's a liar. He's deceptive. Lack of commitment mimics deceptive language. The lack of personal commitment in context is stark. Like I say, Peter Hyatt obviously didn't want to put all his eggs in one basket. The fourth is unknown. Okay, so he's hedging his bets a little bit. But I know where my belief lies there. Personally, I think it's number 3. I don't think Neil Armstrong walked on the lunar surface. And you've also got to bear in mind here that Peter Hyatt is an American who completely believed the Apollo story. He wasn't aware of any conspiracy stuff before he did this analysis. So this is a 100% believer. Okay? So in his emails with me after he did this analysis, this is what he said. This was so unexpected that I ran it by another analyst. I grew up at age 7 with his account. There's a strong emotional connection with childhood national pride. The teachers repeatedly visited it, including newsreels. I did not expect this. I originally felt guilty wasting your money. Your money. But after the first few answers where he is linguistically nowhere to be found, I realized that there is more here than what is ridiculed. Heather, too, that's his wife, who was also a trained analyst, is shocked. We both said the same thing. Things we dismissed as crazy years ago have been proven true more and more. We need to stay more open and explore. Okay, so this is the person who was with the person who does not linguistically connect himself to the lunar surface, Buzz Aldrin, who looks more and more like a lunatic every day. Now, the next interview I'm going to get Peter Hyatt to analyze is this one. Buzz Aldrin being interviewed by Bart Zabrell. This is a very, very different interview to the one that you've just watched, right? Because Buzz Aldrin is actually put on the spot and he's directly challenged. You did not walk on the moon. And in my opinion, he almost admits it. He says, we were on a flight. You need to ask NASA. So I suspect that the transcript from this interview is going to throw up more than that previous one. Okay, so what's going on here? If they didn't land Apollo 11 on the moon, did they land 12 or 14 or 15? Because there are 6 missions that NASA claim landed on the moon. Did any of them go? Were they getting a bit nearer each time? Well, let's present some evidence from Apollo 17, the last mission which supposedly landed on the lunar surface. Here are 2 photographs from that mission. If we look at the top one, we've featured this on Richplanet before, but I think it's important to go through it again. So what we're led to believe here, if you just look at the top image, is that the lunar lander's come down, it's landed on the lunar surface, the astronauts have got out, they've climbed down this ladder, and they've walked towards the camera. One of them's turned round and taken a snapshot of the lunar lander with some hills in the background. They've then continued walking in the same direction, 150 meters. One of them has then started doing a little experiment. The other one turns around and takes a photograph of him with the background. So you can see the lunar lander here in the 2 shots. Now just look at the backdrops. Look how similar they are. Look at Hill B here with this shading on it. What are the chances on Earth if me and you get out of a car and I take a photograph of the car and then we walk 150 meters down the road and I take a photograph of you with a car in the background? What are the chances of getting an almost identical backdrop, right? Now, a skeptic contacted me and said, no, the backdrops aren't identical if you look very closely. There's slight differences in shadows and things here. Well, if what they tell us is true, that it was front screen projection system that was used, i.e. thousands of tiny beads reflecting an image, perhaps these images were also taken on a different day, you are going to get differences. They're not going to be identical. It's not like compositing a green screen image where the images would be identical. So you would expect slight differences in shadow and that kind of thing, which is exactly what we see. So this is very strong evidence, in my opinion, that these photographs are taken in a studio. people have even worked out the size of this studio. You're talking a huge studio, probably in a hangar of the order of 300 meters to the actual backdrop. So it doesn't look good for NASA. And this doesn't prove that Apollo 17 didn't land. It just proves that they've faked some photographs in a studio, or it's strong evidence that they've faked some photographs in a studio. So I think they're very, very worried about this evidence, the evidence of Apollo 11, the new evidence that I've just showed you, because it doesn't look good for NASA. And that's why we get articles like this one. This appeared in the Metro newspaper last year, titled, "Here's Why the Moon Landings Weren't Faked. New Conspiracy Study Proves It." So they feel the need to deny moon conspiracy theories. So it says, in the wilder reaches of the internet, lots of people still believe that NASA faked the moon landings and possibly even its entire space program. But it's absolute balls, a new study has shown. It would have simply been impossible to keep it a secret, according to Oxford scientists. If the moon landings had been a hoax involving an estimated 411,000 people, it would have been found out in 3 years and 8 months. British physicist Dr. David Grimes worked out a mathematical way to calculate the chances of a plot being deliberately leaked by a whistleblower or accidentally uncovered. Now then, what this shows is that Dr. David Grimes has done no research into what moon hoax researchers claim, right? So if you read one of the earliest books by Bill Kaysing, written in the 1970s, called "We Never Went to the Moon," he explains that the whole thing was done without informing all of NASA. In fact, only informing a tiny handful of people. It's all in his book. So why hasn't Dr. Grimes looked at this book? So in Bill Kaysing's book, Bill Kaysing was a technologist. He worked on some of the Apollo technology. He explains, yes, there was a visible NASA Apollo program, but there was also another secret project called the ASP, the Apollo Simulation Project. This is all in Bill Kaysing's book. And he claims that they had a secret base in Nevada, so a considerable sum of money spent on this group that was used to hoax the mission, between $4 and $7 billion. But even that group, even the secret group that was hoaxing the mission, was being ran to Manhattan Project style rules. So only a few people underneath actually knew what was going on. So the Manhattan Project to develop the atomic bomb, only 6 people knew what they were doing. And Bill Kaysing claims that with the hoaxed moon landings, it was the same. So let me give you a little example. In my career as an engineer, the company I worked for used to build these things. This is a generator in a power station, produces the electricity that comes in your home. So I worked for a company called NEI that used to build these. And I worked in the control systems department. So when you have a huge generator like this, you have a rack of electronics called an AVR, automatic voltage regulator, which would look something like that. And it's controlling all aspects of that generator, the voltage and the frequencies and that kind of thing. Now, what you do not do is build your control system and just plug it in and expect it to work, because these cost millions of pounds to build. So what you do is you build a simulator. So it's a box of electronics which will emulate in every respect that piece of hardware, that 500 megawatt generator. And in my time at NEI, this is one of the projects that I was involved with. There's the specifications, Richard. There's an electronics lab. Go ahead and build the generator simulator. So once that's built, the AVR, the control system, is then plugged into it and then is used. So the simulator is used to test and debug the control system. So you know that it's all working correctly because you've proved it with a simulator. And only then do you take it to your power station and then you know it's going to work. So the point I'm making is that simulators are a very important part in engineering. They're used all over the place. I've worked on 2 or 3 different simulator projects in my time as an engineer. Now, if you consider the control desks at NASA for these various Apollo missions, some of these desks might be just monitoring things on the mission. Others might be actually sending data to the mission and controlling things. So all this technology would need to be tested. You wouldn't just build these desks and then use it live on a mission. You would build a simulator. So that simulator would simulate everything in the Apollo rocket, and it would simulate all of the communication data. Now, that simulator might be in the same room. It could be in a different city because it's a comms simulator. But the point is, engineers would be tasked to build a simulator to test the control room. Now, those guys would not be told, hey, we're going to use this to fake the mission. But that technology that they built could well be. So the same applies to the sets. They wouldn't, if they're building these 300-meter sets with their front screen projection systems, right? They're not going to tell all the guys building them what they're for. Well, we're hoaxing the mission, lads. Come on, we put the front screen projection up. They don't. That's not how they work. They're told, well, this is for publicity. Okay? So that's how it works. And it's all explained in Bill Casing's 1970s book, We Never Went to the Moon. So as I say, Dr. David Grimes has done no work, no research. So I wrote to Dr. David Grimes to tell him this, and I didn't get a reply. So I explained to him what I've just explained to you, and I sent him a link to this book, little booklet that I've written all about Mars. Because as you may know, you may have seen some of the programs on Richplanet. I've been working on this for a number of years now, and I'm fairly convinced now. It is a hypothesis, so I wouldn't stake my life on it, right? But I'm fairly convinced that none of the rovers and landers that they say they've sent to Mars landed on the Martian surface. I've challenged anyone to read this book and then after it think that they're on Mars. And in my opinion, it's been done in a very similar fashion to how they did it with Apollo, where all these guys here who really did build a rover and they really did send it to the rocket, etc., but it never went to Mars. But all these guys believe it is on Mars. That's how the conspiracies are run, in my opinion. And I communicated with this guy, Robert Manning, senior engineer on the Curiosity project, and he agreed to answer any technical question that I put to him. So Andrew Johnson and myself, we drafted up 26 questions, and he answered one question and ran away from the rest. So if you want to read all of those questions and the emails that I've shared with Robert Manning, it's all in that book. And you can decide for yourself whether you think they're lying or not. Okay, and just this Sunday just gone, I noticed I was filling my van up with petrol on the way here, and this is the front page of the Sunday Times. After I've just presented this new Peter Hyatt research, yeah? Front page of the Times, the last men on the moon win 2 tickets to see the astronauts. Is that a coincidence? Makes you laugh. So I'd like now to add some additional information that I've recorded after the talk. I just want to bring people's attention to this film, Operation Avalanche, because in my opinion, it's a very clever piece of disinformation. The film itself follows a group of CIA operatives who are spying on NASA, and they accidentally discover that NASA, or a small part within NASA, is planning to fake the moon landings. Now, in my opinion, this film speaks to 2 distinct audiences. The first audience that it speaks to is the audience that already believe the moon landings were faked. And what I think the message is that it's trying to put out to that group is that if the moon landings were fake, then it wasn't authorized. You can't blame the government or NASA or the CIA or intelligence agencies. It was a renegade group within NASA that nobody had control of. So it's trying to dispel any blame from the current system. The second group that I think this film is speaking to is the larger group which just believe the moon landings happened as they were reported. Now, in this film, there's much evidence that moon hoax researchers put forward is covered. So the Stanley Kubrick front screen projection is mentioned, the famous sea rock is mentioned, and many, many other pieces of evidence is mentioned in this film. So it's as if they're trying to mop up all of the evidence that moon hoax researchers have come forward with in order to debunk the moon landings. And they've put it in this film to present it in a slightly wacky way to people who believe the moon landings were real. So if those people then encounter that evidence at a later date, they're more likely to dismiss it because they've seen it in this wacky film. So that's what I think this film is up to, a very clever piece of disinformation. I'm going to read some comments now from Wikipedia about NASA. Just to point out, I don't read from Wikipedia because it represents truth. I read from Wikipedia because it represents the official narrative. It represents what NASA has told the public. So this is the first comment I want to draw people's attention to.
Apollo set major milestones in human spaceflight. It stands alone in sending manned missions beyond low Earth orbit and landing humans on another celestial body. So just consider that. Nobody else, no country, no organization other than the Apollo moon missions have sent anyone beyond low Earth orbit. Now, if you consider the evidence that I've just presented, it's quite possible that those Apollo moon missions did not go beyond low Earth orbit. So what this is telling me, at least in the white world, the acknowledged space projects, possibly none of them have gone beyond low Earth orbit. Here's another quote from Wikipedia. The first manned flight of Orion, that's the new rocket that they're developing, and SLA, Exploration Mission 2 EM2, is to launch between 2019 and 2021. It is a 10 to 14 day mission planned to place a crew of 4 into lunar orbit. So it's going to take them till 2020 just to get a man to orbit the moon. Now, according to NASA, there were 8 missions in the 1960s which orbited the moon with men in the spacecraft. That was 50 years ago. So why is it taking them up until 2020 to do the same? In my opinion, this is more evidence that those 1960s missions probably did not go anywhere near the moon. Here's another quote. On December the 4th, 2006, NASA announced it was planning a permanent moon base. The goal was to start building the moon base by 2020 and by 2024 have a fully functional base. In 2010, President Barack Obama halted existing plans, including the moon base, and directed focus on manned missions to asteroids and Mars, as well as extending support for the International Space Station. So that's very, very unusual. What he's done, he's cancelled this moon project and replaced it with much more far-fetched or much more difficult projects, landing someone on an asteroid or on Mars. So again, I think this could be evidence that we haven't been, at least in the white world, we haven't been beyond low Earth orbit. And that brings about the question, is there some sort of constraint? Now, I've spoken about NASA, and I would suggest that NASA's projects, some of them are fraudulent, not all of them. I think some of the unmanned projects have been real. I think the space shuttle was real. I think the International Space Station is real. But I'm very doubtful about whether Neil Armstrong walked on the moon, and I'm very doubtful about whether any of the Mars rover missions are real. So NASA's running frauds, in my opinion. Now we come on to NATO. NATO, a very different organization, a military organization which includes many nations. Now, ostensibly, NATO is there to protect those nations from threats from people outside of NATO. But if you dig a little bit deeper, you realize that NATO has been used for some very nefarious activities, including Operation Gladio, which was terrorist attacks that were being planned in Europe and blamed on Russia. And it's believed that NATO were involved in that. It's my belief that NATO also have been running secret groups connected to UFOs and possibly targeting and acquiring UFO hardware.
Right. Okay, so I'm going to talk about my film UFOs and NATO now. This is a very dark film, and I'll just quickly summarize it for those of you who haven't seen it. I produced this in 2014. In 1997, a military guy came forward and gave some information to UFO researcher Derek Goff. And he told him that he'd been working in a black ops unit called Find and Secure. So this guy would be, he would be sent to another country in a jet, and they would be then given a helicopter and they would be on standby. And this other part of NATO would be targeting UFOs. So anything that came down to the ground, whether it would be some wreckage from a craft or whatever, their job was to go out in the helicopter and then seal off all of that evidence and stay there, camped out on the ground, until another American team came in to collect up all the evidence and then take it away. And he said that sometimes they would be camped out in a remote location for up to 5 days, people in this unit. And he said in his tour of duty, he witnessed many, many UFOs, and he also witnessed between 35 and 40 mutilated human beings mutilated in exactly the same way that we see animal mutilation cases linked to UFOs. incredible claims. Now, one of the interesting things that Derek Goff asked him was, well, hang on, you're sent out to another country, which takes a while to get there, and then there's engagement with UFOs. He said, yeah. He said, well, how do they know the UFOs are going to be there? And his answer was, he didn't know, but they have foreknowledge. And I asked him the same question, and he gave me the same answer, because the film follows my quest to meet this guy, and I've met him 6 or 7 times now, but he's now gone quiet on me. I've been trying to contact him because of some new information that I've got, but he hasn't been replying. But he gave me the same answer. I don't know, but they do. They know where these UFOs are going to be. Now, I've been puzzling over that. How the hell would NATO know where and when a UFO is going to appear so that they can target it? Now, you might have seen on a recent Richplanet show, I featured this guy, Lee Martin. Now, he had a UFO sighting in the 1970s. Now, he's a miner from, well, not far from here, he lived in Vokru at the time he had the sighting. Now, there was another miner featured on the Richplanet show who gave me an envelope. You might remember it. He actually gave me an envelope in this room. But I suspect now, I'm afraid to say, I don't know, that guy fabricated his account with the other miners in order to take the piss out of Lee Martin. And they've been pulling his leg for over 30 years about it, right? But I do believe that Lee Martin's sighting is a genuine sighting, okay? So this is where he saw the UFO. So he was walking along this road here in Vokru, where there's this mountain which overshadows the village. And he said a light came over. He thought it was a cloud initially, but it moved really, really fast. And then it came down and it landed on top of this hill. So I've done an artist's impression. He said it looked like an old-fashioned carriage clock. Now, when I put out information about this UFO sighting, I was contacted by another guy from the area. Let me just show you this map first. Lee Martin was walking down this road here in the early hours of the morning. He saw the thing land about there, okay? Now, I was contacted by a chap from this village here, Pontlotin. And he said, well, I've got video footage of a UFO from 2007, 10 years ago. Would you like to see it? So I went to see him. He's in the audience tonight, and he showed me the footage. So he notices this object hovering above his washing line in the western sky, and it sat there for over an hour, and it only moved slightly. I've checked all of the different angles that he was filming it from, and it's maybe moved a few degrees throughout the whole time it was there. Now, I have checked the astronomical charts. This was filmed on the 3rd of March, 2007. I've checked that Venus was not in that part of the sky, or any other bright objects were not there. So it's not a star or a planet. It's not a Chinese lantern because it was there for over an hour. It's not a helicopter. It's not a plane. He didn't know what it was, but he was massively intrigued by it, that he sat for over 20 minutes filming it, and he was going from his bedroom to his garden and then to another part of his garden. And he was so intrigued by it, he jumped in his car and he started driving towards it. But as he was driving towards it, it then vanished very quickly. Now, when he's zooming in on this object, I'm not sure that this diamond effect, when it looks like it's shimmering, I'm not sure if that is an accurate representation of the object or whether that's just due to the fact that the camera is not focusing correctly. But it was an anomalous light, and he didn't know what it was. So I went to his house, and I took some photographs from the bedroom window where he filmed it. So as you saw in the video there, the object is hovering mainly above this tree for over an hour. So I took this photograph, which you can see the tree is still there 10 years later. So I've identified the tree on Google Earth. This is the bedroom window here. This is the tree. So if we draw a line through the right-hand side of the tree and then extend that line onto the larger map, I've added 2 more lines in just for a little bit of error. We see that this is very close, possibly, to where Lee Martin had his sighting, which I find very interesting. Now then, I then had a look at an Ordnance Survey map. This road here is this one, and this one coming down there is this one. So we see here on the map, Cairn, C-A-I-R-N, which is an ancient stone circle, right at the point where Lee Martin says he saw his UFO land, and possibly underneath the point where the chap from Pontlotin filmed the footage that you've just seen. So I've looked up some details about this stone cairn. Apparently it's a denuded and robbed out ring cairn in the form of a circular platform about 14 metres in diameter and 0.4 metres high. Partly stony and partly grass covered. There is a possible curb visible on the south side. So I went up there. There's very little left of it. It wasn't even worth taking a photograph of it, right? Now it states here, religious, ritual and funerary, right? The archaeologists do not know that, right? They rarely find bones at these sites. They're just guessing by saying it's religious or ritual, right? And notice it's quite large, 14 metres in diameter. It's quite a large stone circle. Now, I got talking to Andrew Johnson about the subject of stone circles, and we had different opinions on it. And we may well do a show on what the true purpose of stone circles are, because people say, oh, they're for keeping sheep in, or they were buildings, or they were for praying in, or whatever. But I really do think that for many stone circles, there's something a bit more to it. So Andrew pointed me to this book, Seed of Knowledge, Stone of Plenty. Let me just explain the premise of this book. In science books, when we see the Earth with its magnetic field, it's usually shown with a bar magnet running through it and the magnetic field lines coming out like this and going around the Earth, both sides of the Earth or all around the Earth. Now that's not strictly true, because the side of the Earth which faces the sun has a different shaped magnetic field to the dark side. So as the Earth rotates, when it goes from light into dark, the Earth's magnetic field changes. Any electrical engineer will tell you that if you have a changing magnetic field, you will get electricity induced in anything that is in that vicinity. So the Earth's crust has what are called telluric currents, which flow through the Earth's crust, because of the changing Earth's magnetic field. This is real science. You'll find it on Wikipedia. Telluric currents, you can measure them, right? Okay. Now, those currents, when they flow, they will flow according to the conductivity of the rock through the Earth. When you have electric current set up, it will itself generate its own magnetic field. So you'll get a magnetic field going around it with the current going that way. That will then modify the Earth's magnetic field. So what happens is you get anomalies in the Earth's magnetic field during dawn and dusk at certain points on the Earth, according to what rock is there. Now, here's an example of one. So this is in the US. So this magnetic anomaly here in the Earth's magnetic field will occur for a certain period at certain times of the day. So a geomagnetic contour map of a Native American rock chamber in Kent Cliffs, New York, showing a negative magnetic anomaly right at the open doorway typical of such structures. This anomaly will electrify parts of the air as it enters the chamber. So what these researchers have done, they have been to hundreds of sites of stone circles and chambers, right? And they have found at many of these sites, they find these magnetic anomalies. They've built their stone chambers on magnetic anomalies, right? Now, the reason that they build these stone chambers in these particular locations, according to the authors of this book, is that they would use them to make their seeds more fertile. So they would put the seeds in there, and as it says here, the anomaly will electrify parts of the air as it enters the chamber. Now, there is research being done which proves that you can affect a seed's, how well a seed performs by using electricity or electromagnetism. You might say, well, hang on, we're talking 4,000 years old here for these structures. How the hell would they know that there's these magnetic anomalies appearing on the Earth at certain times of the day? Well, the authors of this book claim that certain people are very electrosensitive. Some people are more sensitive to electromagnetism than others, and they would use these people to seek out these areas and build their stone chambers there in order to improve the yield of their seeds. And it's not just one or two chambers that they found this with. Many stone circles, they find these naturally occurring magnetic anomalies. And these magnetic anomalies will have been there probably for millions of years, occurring at certain times during the day. So we come back to our Vokru map, right? We've got possibly 2 cases with UFOs hovering over this area, and we've got a stone circle there. So if we go down the premise that that stone circle was put there because there's a magnetic anomaly there, and this is something on my list of things to do, I need to go up this hill, and I need to take measurements at various points to see if there is a magnetic anomaly at certain times of the day. And do note, you saw there the UFO being filmed. It was at dusk when it was getting dark at the Terminator. And I think Lee Martin's sighting was at dawn, right? So let's just assume that this stone chamber was built because there's a magnetic anomaly there. What about the UFOs? The ancients knew about the magnetic anomalies, so they put their stone circles there. Perhaps the UFO also knows about the magnetic anomaly, but is using it for another reason, not for seeds. I don't know, maybe the aliens have got seeds in their UFO that they're, but perhaps, is it some sort of getting energy from there, or is it a portal? I don't know, but is the UFO benefiting from some sort of magnetic anomaly? And the other thing that I haven't said yet is that the 3rd of March, 2007, when that UFO was hovering above that hill, is the night of a total lunar eclipse, right? So does the position of the Earth and the Sun and the Moon affect the magnetic anomalies? Does it enhance them, perhaps? All right. Now, if you consider what I've just explained, let's say someone maps out all of the best magnetic anomalies all around the planet, and perhaps on certain nights they're much higher in energy, right? And that NATO know which ones the UFOs are going to appear at. So perhaps this explains how NATO have worked out how they have foreknowledge of UFO activity. So it's just a hypothesis, okay? But I am going to go up that hill and take some measurements to see if we've got magnetic anomalies at dawn and dusk. Okay, now let's come on to this film now, because I have got some new information that I'm going to go through. As I said, this guy worked in this special unit, and he told Derek Goff and myself about various different cases. This is a representation of 2 bodies that were found on the Brecon Beacons. So what's alleged to have happened is that a vehicle was parked in a lay-by in a place called Llambedda, not far from Crickhowell. A young couple were abducted from the vehicle in their seats. So when the military found the car, there were no front seats in there, where the lights were on and the engine was running. So the military took the vehicle away, they took samples, and then they started a search, which took 2 weeks. 2 weeks before the bodies were found, and they were found just south of Talabont Reservoir, right? But the military bagged them, and then that was all covered up, and they had the classic mutilation injuries. Okay, here's some of Derek Goff's notes from 1997. We see here that the military went to the car, the engine was running, there was no one there, there was no seats in the front. They took the car away, and they took samples from the ground. 2 weeks later, 3 kilometers away from where the car was found, 2 bodies, blah, blah, blah. Now, I've since found out, by the way, this is news articles that I have correlated with this case, and this has allowed me to determine the probable date of when this happened. So yeah, I've since had new information that the bodies were actually just south of Talabont Reservoir, which is 13 kilometers where the car was found. Now, the reason why I'm explaining all this is because of the date. So the bodies the couple were abducted on the 20th of August, 1990, according to the military source. So 2 weeks after that is the 3rd of September. 3rd of September, 1990 is when these bodies were found there on the Brecon Beacons. And there have allegedly been more than just this case on the Brecon Beacons. Now, in the film, the military guy explains that this military facility is used for UFO tracking and possibly for UFO targeting. So this is 5 miles northwest of Sennybridge. You can find it on Google Earth, right? You see here there are trees being built which prevent you from seeing in there. You can drive along this road. It is a military road, but the public are allowed along there, but you're not meant to stop your car. Now, there's a concreted area in this facility here, and there's 4 posts in the corner, which our military source claims as part of this weapon. He also says that there's a radar dish, I don't know where in the facility, that comes up from underneath the ground at night, and it rotates, a bit like an airport radar, and that finds where the UFO is, and that there's some weapon system, non-ballistic, that can actually target the UFO and cause it to come down to the ground. Incredible claims. So the research that I've been involved with over the last few months is to try and verify these claims about this military facility. So I've attempted to find out what its true purpose is. So this is the first article I've been able to find, which is an article from before this facility was built. This is in the western fringes of Munad Ebend, it's called. So this is Brecon Radnor Express, Thursday, the 29th of November, 1990. So this is just 8 weeks after when the bodies were found. Secret plans to site huge radar masts on Ebent Hills. So this is talking about proposals to build that military facility that our source claims is a UFO-related facility. MP drops bombshell. MP for Brecon and Radnor, Richard Livesey, dropped a bombshell this week with the disclosure that the Ministry of Defence is secretly planning to site a massive naval communication system on the western fringes of Munid Ebent. It was on Tuesday that the Welsh Liberal Democrat leader revealed that up to 4 skyscraper radar masts, some 1,500 feet above ground level, are to be built on the Sennybridge military ranges as part of an intelligence network for the Trident nuclear submarine fleet. So only this one MP was giving out this information. So he had a source, probably in the MOD, that had told him that they were going to build this facility. But they told him that it was just a Trident communication system. So in other words, it's nothing to do with UFOs, it's a communication system for Trident. Now this MP is quite annoyed in this article, and he's saying, well, why are you building a Navy communication system up on the Brecon military ranges, Army ranges? Why don't you build it near the ocean or near the sea, on Navy land? And these masts are 1,500 feet high, 4 masts, that's what they're proposing to build in this article. So this is Richard Livesey here, who got this information somehow. Unfortunately, he died in 2010, so it would have been really good to speak to him, but we can't do that, unfortunately. So, so we've got a news article appeared on the 20th of December 1990 titled "Authenticity of Radar Masts Plan Challenged." So there's other MPs who are criticising Richard Livesey, saying, no, he's talking rubbish. They're not secretly planning to build anything on these Army ranges. One of his political opponents has challenged the claim made by Brecon and Radnor MP Richard Livesey that the Ministry of Defence is secretly planning to site a massive naval communications system on the western fringes of the Sennybridge Army ranges. This week, the prospective Conservative candidate Jonathan Evans stated that he had received an assurance from the Secretary of State for Wales, David Hunt, there is no such proposals on Munid Ebent, right? So the Secretary of State for Wales hasn't even been told, a member of the government. So this tells you that Richard Livesey had secret information. Okay, not about building a UFO tracking facility, but about building some Trident communication system. So Richard Livesey then starts making a bit of a nuisance of himself. On the 10th of January 1991, Minister fails to allay fears over masts. So he starts asking questions in Parliament whether the MOD or the Secretary of State for Defence has changed his plans to site naval radar radio masts on Her Majesty's land on the Sennybridge Range in the Brecon and Radnor. So he's then given a reply. A requirement for new defence communication facilities is under consideration, but no decision on location have yet been taken. So they are now admitting that they might be building one somewhere. So then 2 months later, the MOD comes clean at last over Ebent Range masts. So this is the 14th of March 1991. The government admit, yes, we are going to build something at that facility. It's official. The Ministry of Defence is considering the Sennybridge military ranges as a site for 4 massive communication masts as part of a NATO intelligence network for the Trident submarine fleet. Isn't that interesting? We've got that word NATO, which is the title of my film, UFOs and NATO. Okay, so now let me just explain what these proposed masts look like. This is the skyline of London. The tallest building in London is the Shard. It's 1,000 feet high. So if you were to put one of these radar masts next to it, that's what it would look like. So you could see why the MPs and the local council are getting annoyed that they're going to put 4 of these masts in an area of outstanding natural beauty there on the Brecon Beacons. Now, let me just also explain the reason why they need to be this tall is because it's a VLF station, very low frequency. You need huge masts to transmit low frequency radio waves. The reason why they need to be so low frequency is so that they can penetrate through the ocean to speak to a submarine, right? This is a one-way communication system. The submarine can't send any information back, right? But there are several of these VLF transmission stations around the world, and they all have these extremely high masts. So here's an example one in Western Australia. These masts are 1,270 feet high. This station runs at 19.8 kilohertz. They have to be this size, but very low frequency, because normal radio waves won't travel through the ocean. It's got to be low frequency. This is a photograph of that facility during the day. We can see the masts. You can see this one is built next to the ocean, and nearly all of them are built next to the ocean. This is a diagram of one. Here's one in the UK. This one has 13 masts, 745 feet. It's in Cumbria. This runs at 19.6 kilohertz. As you can see, built near the sea. This is one in Germany, 1,157 feet high masts. You'll understand why I'm telling you this in a second. Now, if you go on the website smeter.net, you will find many of the world's VLF stations listed. Now, I've been through this entire list and Googled all of them and trying to get photographs of each one. Every single one of them, 1,000-foot masts, right? You can't communicate with a submarine unless you've got huge transmission masts. So, on the 28th of March 1991, this article is just all about how the council are going to oppose these plans, and they're making it awkward. And a very interesting article pops up 6 months later. Sensitive material missing after raid on MP's office. So this is Richard Livesey, the guy who somehow had information on this facility before he should have. Questions were being raised this week whether a weekend burglary at the constituency offices in Brecon of Liberal Democrat MP Richard Livesey was politically motivated. Describing the break-in as sinister, Mr. Livesey revealed this week that £6,000 worth of computer equipment stolen in the raid contained sensitive material. He believed the intruders, who did a very professional job in gaining access to the premises, considered to be very secure, were carrying out a special mission. The thieves were not a bunch of amateurs, but knew what they were looking for, said Brecon and Radnor, Member of Parliament. So was someone, perhaps connected to the MOD, breaking into his office to find out how the hell, who is his source, where we had this leak from, and possibly, does he know more? Does he know more about the purpose of this facility? Okay, and here it is. So as I said, these 4 posts are on the corner of this concreted area. Now I'm just going to show you some Ordnance Survey maps which show that the posts or the masts were put up in the 1990s. Here's a photograph that I took of them. This is present day. Right, this is a present day Ordnance Survey map, and you can see these are the trees that you saw in the other image. That's the concreted area where the posts are, or the masts. Here's a more detailed Ordnance Survey, and the 4 masts are marked by these 4 dots. As I say, that's present day. If we go back to 1989 Ordnance Survey, you see they've actually got the facility prepared, but there's no detail of the masts. 1996, still no detail of the masts. If we go to 1998, we see that the concreted area is there, but no masts. 1999, we have masts. So the first appearance of the masts on Ordnance Survey is in 1999. Now that doesn't mean they were put up in 1999. It means they were put up at least in 1999. So this facility was constructed with the masts in the 1990s. So I think the reason why I'm presenting this is to show you that they are talking about the same facility. And that facility is on the western fringes of the Munard-Epping Range. So they are talking about the facility. And this is a photograph that I've taken. You don't hang around too long when you're there. So here's another image. So you can see that the masts are actually connected with wires. This is a CCTV system. Here's an aerial view from Google Earth. So you can see the 4 masts cast in shadows here. Here's another photograph that I've taken. Again, you can see wires connecting two of the, well, I'll not call them aerials, 2 of the masts. Now here's a close-up of the bases, which are extremely robust if these are just transmitters. Now, you'll notice on this Google Earth image, there's a scale here, 10 meters. So I was able to work out the distance between the masts. And now that I know the distance between the masts, using this photograph, I've worked out the height of the masts, okay? So I've now produced an isometric engineering drawing of one of these masts. Here it is. They're 44 feet high. There's no way that this is a transmitter for a Trident communication system. I cannot speak to a submarine, right? And I'm not convinced that these are even transmitters. They're some sort of mast, but I'm not convinced it is an aerial. But let's say it was an aerial used in what's called quarter wavelength mode, which is a common mode. you calculate the frequency at around about 5.5 megahertz, which is the low end of the HF band. There's no way that that signal could penetrate through the ocean to a submarine. Now, a friend of mine is on a radio comms forum on the internet, and I gave him some of this information with photographs of the masts, and he posted it on a Radio Buffs forum just to get their opinions on what this might be. The first guy said, oh, they're lightning conductors. Then another guy said, no, they're radio beacons. Someone else chips in, they're long-range artillery comms antennas for field army training. Then another guy says they're multi-directional aircraft tracking. No, another guy says it's HERTAS, which jam aircraft locating finding equipment. Apparently someone said it's known by some as the telephone exchange. Then another guy pops up and he says, no, you're all wrong. It's a NATO Trident communication submarine system. And he then posts a link to one of Richard Livesey's parliamentary questions with the MOD's answer, confirming that it is a Trident communication system. So everyone on the radio forum then says, oh, well, that's it. And then they start talking about something else. We've solved that one. It's just for Trident. And they all agreed, right? But I can tell you that it can't be. It can't be. In my opinion, the government have lied about what they're going to build. Now, just forget the whole subject of UFOs for a second. That in itself is worthy of note. That the government have told everyone that they're going to build 1,500 feet high transmitters for their nuclear Trident program, and what they've built is this. I don't know what it is, right? It's 44 feet high. It's not, that cannot communicate with Trident, right? So, you know, it's built on army land on top of a hill. It's not near the ocean like most of these VLF transmission stations are. So it is something completely different in my opinion. And I do think this proves that the government have lied. And here's how the four are laid out. So what could it be? Now, you saw that there was wires connecting some of them, and it is possible to have what's called a wire antenna. So you will have two posts. Sometimes you attach it to a building, and the wire itself is the antenna. So in this case, the wire would be about 40 meters long. So even if that was used in quarter wavelength mode, you're talking 1.87 megahertz. It is slightly lower frequency, but not much. Some people have said, oh, well, they're used as 12th or 16th wavelength, right? No matter which way you look at it, it's not a Trident communication system. It's nowhere near big enough. So it's something else, in my opinion. So what could it be? I've had a few thoughts on it. One suggestion is that it might be a phased array. If you have a single transmitter and you apply frequency to it, the energy will dissipate outwards like this. If you have 2, 3, 4, or multiple transmitters and you apply the same frequency, would phase shift them so they're slightly out of sync. If you do it right, you can create a beam. So the energy doesn't dissipate in all directions, and you can focus that beam. You can point it at an area in the sky and focus it. So this is what HARP is. It's a phased array. So is this a phased array? I don't know. Like I say, I'm not even convinced that these are radio transmitters. They look far too robust to just be normal antennas. So we see that there's wires attached to them. Is it the case that those wires are used to suspend something which we don't see? Something which is not there, which perhaps they bring out at night? I don't know. So is it a directed energy weapon? Is this what's used to target UFOs, to interfere with their propulsion system, to bring them down to the ground, which is what our military source said? Now, another theory is maybe they are what's called waveguides. So a waveguide is like a metal tube that you fire microwaves down. So if they were waveguides, then you're talking much higher frequencies, and you'd have some sort of magnetron maybe under the ground. I'm just hypothesizing here. I do not know what this facility is, but I'm putting out the information so the technical people can watch this and then tell me what this is. I'm not going to jump in with both feet and say, look, I told you this is what they're shooting UFOs down with, because I don't know that it is. But this is what our military source said, and it's not a Trident communication system. Okay, as I've said, these might not be aerials, there could be supports for something else. And they do run, they have been running GPS jamming exercises up there. So this, between the 15th and 26th of August, what they've done, they install some equipment which is just 2.3 miles from this facility. And what this does is it stops GPS systems from working. Like if you've got a drone or whatever. But I've been told that the reason why they do this is when the troops are on exercises and they're doing map reading or whatever, some of them will cheat. They'll carry a GPS thing around with them so they can cheat. So the military jam GPS. So there's possibly just a straightforward explanation why they've got jamming systems up there. So if anyone's got any information, please do forward it to me, and I'll be very interested to hear what you've got to say. Okay, now, just to summarize and finish tonight's talk, some of this information is very confusing because you say, well, it looks like they faked certain of the moon landings. But Richard, in one of your previous talks, you were talking about the TR-3B, which is this incredible vehicle that can go really, really fast and go to other planets. So how does that match with the moon landings being faked? And also the Mars rover missions being faked? Because in a previous Richplanet show, we've suggested that some of the lunar and Mars orbiters may have filmed ruins on the surface. So Cydonia on Mars. We've also got the testimony of Carl Wolf, who said that there was ruins or buildings on the far side of the moon. So how does it all hang together? And we've also got the UFO mystery, which is still very much a mystery. Now, in order to try and attempt to explain all of this evidence, I'm going to throw in another theory, which is called the constraints of Gaia. Anyone heard of this? Constraints of Gaia theory states that all life on Earth is in some way connected to the Earth. We're all part of the Earth, either electromagnetically or through some other means, and that if you leave the Earth after you get past a certain distance, you will cease to be. You cannot go further than a certain distance. You will lose your marbles, or your heart will stop, or what have you. That there's some sort of constraint that is some sort of physical or electromagnetic constraint within all life on the Earth. We're part of the planet. That's the theory of the constraints of Gaia. The theory goes that NASA discovered this in their space missions as they got further away from the Earth, and they've been working on how to get around it. So they need to build a simulator to simulate the Earth, to take with them perhaps. So I'm going to summarize, and I'm going to give you a hypothesis. This is just a hypothesis, and it might completely change next year if I get new evidence. But here's my stab at it. I've updated the hypothesis since I've given this lecture, so I'll give you the up-to-date one. Advanced propulsion craft have been developed by man in secret and are being used on and around the Earth in secret up to a certain orbital height, i.e. within low Earth orbit. Space-based weapons, such as observed on 9/11, have also been developed. All this technology is classified. They are trying to solve the constraints of Gaia issue, which is another classified project. Once resolved, this will enable manned travel beyond low Earth orbit to other planets in craft already designed or built, not based on rockets. Photographs from unmanned Moon and Mars orbiters of ruins have shown other civilizations have been on the Moon and Mars before us, but this is classified. Advanced ancient knowledge of all kinds of technology has been discovered in many archaeological finds on the Earth of previously advanced civilizations. Where possible, this has been classified. To help conceal all these classified projects, a semi-fake space program continues, which includes the commercial space program. The UFO phenomenon has provided some astonishing new knowledge, and this knowledge is classified. The knowledge includes information about human origins, energy and propulsion. It includes information on the purpose of mutilations and abductions. Some UFOs appear to involve consciousness and as yet undefined physics. NATO have been actively targeting and acquiring UFO technology without public knowledge. Here's Tom with the weather. Okay, that's it, folks. But do remember, believe none of what you hear, including from me, and only half of what you see. I'm Richard D. Hall. Good night. Thank you. Thank you.